Hey everyone, just checking in again with you guys, channel update. So I found some ways to monetize the channel that will actually allow me to put money in my pocket for the work that I'm putting in without changing the content one bit. So what that means, we're still actually going to be able to get our black screens, we're still going to get the atmospheric backgrounds, the fireplace, the dark forest, things like that, right? Same long form, Skinwalker encrypted content, stories that you all gamer for. None of the gaming background, no, face cam reaction garbage. Might have, introductory like here, so that way anyone that still thinks, oh yes, I might be AI or whatever, can put that to rest. Those that obviously know, but no matter what, some people are still going to think it unless they can physically see you. Also, so here's some things that will be changing though. So, beginning every story, we'll have either a short sponsored segment from sponsors that I may have been able to obtain. I do have a couple in the works right now. Or in the description box and, whatnot, there would be a link, affiliate link, to products that I am selling out of my TikTok shop. These are all products that I personally own, I personally use. I wouldn't want to sell anything to you guys that I didn't believe in myself. Anyone that goes to that link and purchases it through my TikTok shop will credit me directly for my work and my effort. Not required, not expected. These are just the ways that I'm going to be able to monetize my work and still get paid for it, since YouTube is refusing to monetize me because they say inauthentic content. I don't know how much more authentic you can get for this, but I digress. So we're still going to have the same cold opens, the full immersion, no narrator stepping out to do fourth wall breaks in the middle of the story, things like that. I'm not breaking the format, I'm just adding ways to basically get paid up front. So I can keep making this content and eventually pivot here the next couple of months, planning around August to pivot into doing this kind of stuff full time. I also want to be straight with everyone about a couple more things. So YouTube is still going to run ads on all of my content. And unfortunately, because I'm not monetized, I have no say-so in any of this. I don't pick the ad placement, I don't pick the type of ads, I don't pick how many ads, I have no control over them. I can't even opt out of ads. So what that means is YouTube is still running ads. I am not getting paid anything from the ads that you are seeing. I don't have any control over it, I make nothing off of it. Unfortunately, unless you're monetized, there's no way to say, I don't want ads, I don't want minimal ads. So if we're in the middle of a story and you start seeing random Geico ads or something like that, just know that is YouTube. I don't have any control over that. I'm sorry guys, my hands are tied. There's just nothing I can do. If the ads get to the point where you just can't enjoy the stories, there are other ways that you could view the content. So I am on Spotify as well. That is now my main platform because that one directly pays me for my work, but I will still be able to upload on here. On that kind of stuff there, if you have Spotify Premium, you can get ad-free version of the stuff as well. I also have Patreon, $5 a month, $4.99 to be specific, will get you access to all my content ad-free, as well as the first 100 people or so that sign up for that using the links that are spread out around on this channel will be able to get the first 3 months they have the Patreon. So 3 full months of it, completely no cost to them, no cost to sign up, no cost to keep it. And if you enjoy it and like the style and get used to that, then you keep it for the $4.99. Otherwise, just cancel it. Just my way of saying thank you to everyone who's supporting me and been with me throughout this and helped me grow this community, because we're more than just a YouTube page at this point, to what it is today. So with all of that said, moving forward, so that's kind of what we can expect now, what things are the way they are. As far as tonight's stories, we have 5 individual Skinwalker camping stories. These are all 5 men, 5 trips out into the backcountry alone, and they're going to cover a solo camper in southern Arizona, a father and son on a fishing trip in New Mexico, a geologist working a contract on a mesa in Four Corners country. Ugh, wow, horrible. Retired firefighter scattering his brother's ashes in a Utah slot canyon, and 2 best friends on their annual May trip, up on hiking basically. Each one of them goes out for a reason. Each one of them hears something out past the edge of their campfire night, that knows their name and it should not. It also knows things about them it should not know. So apologize if anyone's hearing my dogs or not my car alarm, but one of my neighbor's cars is going off for some reason. But with that said, we'll get into the quick sponsor segment, and then after that, we'll just get directly into the story. Same opening like normal. This will kind of be the standard moving forward. Maybe a little me on the screen, brief introduction of the story, obviously the sponsored segment or the affiliate segment, and then directly into the story. Thank you all for joining. Thank you all for standing by me during this period of up and down. What is he doing? What is he not doing? I know I've kind of been all over the place, but so has YouTube with the information they've been giving me and other creators that I've been and worked with in touch with. Thank you all so much, and please enjoy.
Story 1: The Bone Wash. The wind picked up around midnight and started moving the tent walls in a way that wasn't quite right. Not flapping, more like something was leaning against the nylon and then easing back. Lean, ease, lean, ease. I lay in my sleeping bag listening to it and trying to convince myself it was the wind doing what wind does in the desert when it comes down off the rim and finds something to push against. After a while I sat up and unzipped the door and looked. Nothing out there. Just the wash bottom white as flour in the moonlight and the dark scrub on the banks, and my truck parked under the cottonwood 30 feet away. The fire I'd built earlier had burned down to embers and was breathing slow and orange like a sleeping animal. I zipped the door back up and lay down. Lean. Ease. I had come out to Bonewash because I'd signed the divorce papers 4 days earlier, and I knew myself well enough to know that if I sat in my apartment in Tucson with my phone in my hand, I was going to call Diane. I was going to say something I couldn't take back. I was going to apologize for things I hadn't done and accept blame for things she'd done, and then she'd say something measured and tired in that voice she used now, and I'd hate myself for a week. So I'd packed the truck and driven west on the old Cibola Pass road until the asphalt turned to gravel and then to dirt, and then I'd turned off the dirt onto a track that was barely a track, and I'd come down into the wash where my dad used to take me when I was a kid. You couldn't get a signal out here. That was the whole point. No phone, no calls, no late-night text messages I'd regret in the morning. Just me and the dry sand and the cottonwoods that had been hanging on for 100 years and the stars that came out so thick you couldn't pick out the constellations because the spaces between them filled in. My name is Eddie Camarillo. I'm 47. I install commercial HVAC systems for a living, mostly chain restaurants and dental offices, and I drink Coors Banquet when I drink, which is less than I used to. I quit smoking 5 years ago except when something goes wrong, and then I buy American Spirits and tell myself it's just for tonight. I had a soft pack of American Spirits in my breast pocket when I drove into Bone Wash that afternoon, and 3 of them were already gone. My dad had brought me to the wash for the first time when I was 9. He'd been a Border Patrol agent for 30 years, and he knew the back country the way other men know the streets of the town they grew up in. He taught me to read a map and to find water and to keep my mouth shut around the campfire so the coyotes didn't think we were prey. He died in 2018 of pancreatic cancer that took him in 11 weeks, from diagnosis to grave. Diane had been good through that. That was one of the things I'd been thinking about, lying there in the tent, listening to the wind that wasn't quite the wind. She'd been good through that, and now she was gone. Lean, ease. I rolled onto my side and put the pillow over my ear. The drive in that afternoon had been one of those drives where you can feel the world unzip behind you. The asphalt had given out at the BLM sign. Past that, the gravel had taken over, and the houses had stopped, and the country had spread out wide and brown on either side, the way it does in southern Arizona, where the land hasn't been used for anything in 100 years. I'd seen one truck the whole way. An old beat-up Ford with a man in a cowboy hat at the wheel and a black dog standing up in the bed with his face to the wind. The man had raised one finger off the steering wheel as we passed each other. I had done the same. That was the last human contact I had had until the voice came that night. I had parked under the cottonwood a little before 5. I'd set up the tent. I'd built a fire. I'd sat by the fire and watched the sun work its way down the west wall of the wash, the light going from yellow to gold to a kind of bronze. And I'd thought about how my dad had said once that a man in this country who could not be alone with himself was a man without a friend. I had taken that to mean when I was a kid that being alone with yourself was a thing to be proud of. I think now what he meant was different. I think now he meant that you better be all right with the man you bring out here, because there is nobody else for miles, and the country is going to ask you who you are. The country had asked me, and I hadn't been ready for the asking. Bonewash gets its name from the time in the 70s when a drought year exposed a wagon train burial in the South Bank, 6 bodies in a shallow trench, lined up shoulder to shoulder, the bones still wearing the rags of clothes. The county sheriff brought out an anthropologist from the university in Tucson, and they dated the burial to about 1862. Nobody ever figured out which wagon train it had been. The bodies got moved to a small cemetery in Cibola Pass, and the wash kept its name, and most years there's nothing here but lizards in the wind. It's a good place to camp because there's no road close enough to get visitors, and the cottonwoods give shade in the day, and at night the wash bottom holds the light from the sky, so you can walk around without a flashlight. I had checked my watch when I crawled into the tent. It was 10:15. Now I checked it again, and it was 3:15. I had been asleep then, or a part of me had. I didn't remember falling asleep. I remembered listening to the lean and the ease, and then I was looking at the watch face, and 5 hours had passed. The lean had stopped. I lay there and tried to figure out what had changed. The tent walls were still. The wind, if it was still there, was somewhere else. I could hear the cottonwoods sighing way up at the top, but the air down here at the wash bottom was dead still. Somebody said my name. I want to be careful how I describe this. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't even a regular speaking voice. It was the kind of voice a person uses when they're trying not to wake the rest of the house. A whisper, almost, but pitched in a way that carried. It said, "Eddie." I sat up. My heart was going hard enough that I could feel it in my ears. I sat there in the bag with my legs tangled in it, and I waited. It came again, from somewhere up the wash to the north. Eddie. I knew the voice. You can dress up the way you tell yourself this story all you want. You can say it was the wind. You can say it was a coyote. You can say it was your imagination, your tired brain making patterns out of nothing, because that's what brains do at 3 a.m. when they're hurting. I told myself all of that. I sat there in the tent, and I told myself all of that, and the voice came a third time. Eddie, wake up. It was Diane. I had been married to her for 19 years, and I knew her voice the way you know the smell of your own bed. I knew it the way I knew the song of the screen door at our old house. I knew it the way I knew the sound her keys made when she set them down on the counter on a Friday night. There was no question, and that's the part I want you to understand. There was no part of me that thought, that might be Diane. There was a part of me that knew immediately and unconditionally that it was Diane, and another part that knew immediately and unconditionally that Diane was 400 miles away in our old house in Tucson, sleeping, probably alone, probably without thinking about me much at all. I sat there for what must have been 5 minutes, maybe more. The voice didn't come again. Finally, I unzipped the tent door and crawled out. The wash bottom was still pale in the moonlight. The cottonwoods were dark. My truck was there. The fire was nothing now but a gray ring with a single coal still ticking in it. I could see my own breath, faint in the cold. I stood there in my long johns and my dad's old Carhartt jacket, and I looked up the wash. About 100 yards off, where the wash bent left around an outcrop, there was a shape. It was the shape of a person standing in the middle of the wash. The moonlight wasn't strong enough to make out anything more than the outline. Could have been a man, could have been a woman, could have been a juniper bush that I just hadn't noticed before. I went back to the truck and got my flashlight. It was a big mag light, 4 D cells, the kind that's also a weapon if it comes to it. I flicked it on and pointed it up the wash. Nothing there. I held the beam steady and walked it back and forth across the outcrop and the banks. The cottonwoods threw long, bright trunks and dark shadows. A pair of eyes flashed yellow from up in the brush, a coyote probably, watching me. I walked the beam past them and kept looking. Nothing standing in the middle of the wash. All right, I said out loud. All right. My voice sounded thin and small. I went back to the tent and I sat on the edge of the cot and I lit one of the American spirits and smoked it slow. I had taken my boots off when I went to bed, and I put them on now and laced them tight. I left the flashlight on, lying on its side, so it threw a column of light across the tent floor and out the door. I sat there for a long time. The night did the things nights do. Some kind of owl called from up the rim. A car or a truck went by on the dirt road somewhere far above me, and then it was gone. I smoked another cigarette. I thought about my dad. I thought about my daughter Hannah, who was a sophomore at New Mexico State, and how I hadn't called her in 2 weeks and how that was on me. She had her mother's dark hair and her grandmother's laugh, and she'd been a soccer goalie all through high school. When she was 7, she'd asked me if the moon was the same moon her abuela was looking at in Mexico, and I'd said yes, and she'd said good, because she wanted them to have something they shared. I thought about how I had not been the kind of father in the last 2 years that I had wanted to be. I thought about how that was on me too. I thought about Diane, but I made myself think about Diane in a careful, controlled way, like a man walking on a narrow ledge thinks about not falling. The voice didn't come again that night. Around 5:30 the sky started to grease itself toward dawn, and by 6 I had the fire going and coffee on, and by 7 the sun was up and the wash was full of yellow light and birdsong, and the whole thing felt foolish. I drank my coffee and ate a granola bar and looked at the bend where the shape had been, and there was nothing there. Just sand and a few rocks, and the wash going on around the bend toward the place where it dropped over a little falls and into the next stretch. I told myself I'd had a dream. I told myself I'd been half awake when I thought I heard her name, when I thought I heard her calling my name. I told myself a lot of things, sitting there in the morning sun with my mug warming my hands, and I almost believed them. I should have packed up and driven home. I want to say that, looking back. I should have. But I had 3 more days of vacation, and the truck was already where it was, and I told myself I was going to stay a week, and a man who breaks his own promises stops being a man you can trust. So I stayed. I spent the day doing the kind of things you do when you're trying to outrun your own head. I walked up the wash to the place where the wagon burial had been, though there was nothing to see now, just a slight depression in the south bank that you wouldn't notice unless somebody told you to look. I stood there for a while. There was something about it, the depression in the sand, that wasn't right in a way I couldn't name. The shape was wrong. The shape was too long. The shape ran from where the body should have been all the way to where my tent was, 200 yards down the wash, and I had not noticed it that way the first time I walked it. I told myself I was tired. I told myself the morning light was strange. I sat on a rock and ate jerky. The jerky was the kind my dad used to buy from a place on the road to Sonoyta that sold it out of a smokehouse out back. I'd bought a bag the last time I was through there, 2 months ago. The bag still smelled like the smokehouse when I opened it. I sat on the rock with the bag in my lap, and I thought about my dad in the smokehouse, that one time he'd taken me when I was a kid, and the way he talked to the old man who ran it about a thing that had happened to a cousin of his out near Florence. The old man had nodded and said, "See, see," and not asked questions. I remembered being 11 and bored and wanting to leave. I remembered the smell of mesquite smoke. I sat on the rock, and I held the bag, and I missed him in a way that didn't have a shape. I read 40 pages of a Louis L'Amour paperback I'd brought, the kind with the cover where a man in a hat is squinting at the horizon. The book was Hondo. I'd read it 3 times before. I read it the way a man chews gum. The words went past my eyes and didn't catch. Halfway through I realized I'd read the same page twice and put the book down. I drank water. I walked back. I checked the truck for no reason. The truck was the truck. The mirror was where I'd left it. The doors were locked. I unlocked them and got in and sat in the driver's seat and turned the radio on. The AM news station out of Phoenix came in scratchy, but it came in. The man on the news was talking about a fire near Globe. I sat there for a minute listening to the man on the news talk about a fire near Globe, and then I turned the radio off and got out and locked the truck again. By late afternoon I was tired in a clean way, a body tired, and I felt better. I built up the fire as the sun went down, and I cooked a can of Hormel chili in a pot and ate it with cornbread I'd brought from a place in town. I drank 1 Coors Banquet, very slow. The sunset turned the wash walls the color of dried blood, and then a color that was almost purple and then dark. The stars came out. I sat by the fire for a long time. I watched the coals work. I thought about a thing my dad had said once, about how a man could sit by a fire and watch it for hours, and find at the end of those hours that he had not been thinking about anything in particular, and yet had thought a great deal. I think he'd been right about that. I sat there and I watched the coals, and the fire did what fires do. And after a while I noticed I was tired in my whole body. And I noticed the wash was very quiet. There were no coyotes that night. There should have been coyotes. The first night I'd heard them clear and close, 3 or 4 of them yipping a half-mile off and then closer and then farther. This night there was nothing. The cottonwoods made their high sigh up at the top, and that was all. It didn't strike me as wrong at the time. I noticed it, and I let it pass. It strikes me as wrong now. A little after 9, I got into the tent and lay down and closed my eyes. I went out fast. I remember that. I remember closing my eyes, and then I remember the voice again. Eddie. I was awake before my eyes were open. The flashlight was still on the floor of the tent where I'd left it that morning, throwing its column of light. I checked my watch. 3:41. Eddie, I need to talk to you. I lay there. I didn't move. I tried to slow my breathing. The voice was Diane's. There was no question. It was exactly her voice. It was the voice she used in a serious conversation, the one she used when she wanted me to listen. There was a slight strain in it. There was the catch she got when she was trying not to cry. Eddie, please. The voice was closer than it had been the night before. The night before, it had come from 100 yards up the wash, near the bend. This time it sounded like it was coming from maybe 20 feet outside the tent. I didn't move. Eddie, I know you can hear me. I drove all the way out here. Don't you dare make me stand out here. That stopped my breath. It was the kind of thing she would say. It was the rhythm of her irritation, the exact way she would say it. It was so precisely her that the part of my mind that had spent the day reasoning with itself collapsed in on itself like a sand wall. Eddie, I made myself move. I made myself sit up. I made myself reach for the flashlight. I opened the tent door, slowly, and pointed the beam out. The wash was empty. The cottonwoods were dark. My truck was 30 feet off, under the tree, and the windshield caught my flashlight beam and threw a piece of it back at me. There was nobody there. I aimed the light up the wash. Empty. Down the wash. Empty. The banks. Empty. I stood up and stepped out of the tent. Diane, I said. I felt like an idiot saying it. I felt like a man who was about to be told a hard truth about himself. Eddie. It came from above me, from the rim, from somewhere up on the north bank. I jerked the light up. Nothing in the beam. Just brush and rock and the dark sky beyond. Eddie, come up here. I stood there with the flashlight in my hand, and I felt the cold come into the bottoms of my feet through my boots. I felt the cold come up my legs. I felt it find my chest and settle in. I said, "What did you say to me the night Hannah was born?" This was a calculation. This was the thing the brain reaches for when the brain is trying to claw back the floor. There had been a moment in the hospital after Hannah was out and on Diane's chest, and Diane was crying and I was crying, and the nurse had stepped out, and Diane had looked at me and said the thing she said. It was a private sentence. It was a sentence I had never told anybody. Diane and I had repeated it to each other over the years, but only to each other, only in private. If this was Diane, the real Diane, somehow, impossibly, standing up on the rim of Bone Wash at 3:41 in the morning, she would know. There was a long silence. Then the voice said, "What? What did you say to me the night Hannah was born?" Silence. "Eddie, what are you talking about?" I stood there. "Eddie, come up here. I have to tell you something." I went back into the tent. My hands were shaking so hard I had trouble with the zipper. I sat on the cot with the flashlight in my lap and I tried to think. It was somebody messing with me, maybe. Some kid out in the backcountry with a recording or something. But who would know my voice? Who would know to use Diane's? The wash was 12 miles from the nearest road of any importance. You couldn't drive in here. You'd have to know about the track that came down off the dirt road, and you'd have to know I was going to be in the wash that week, and you'd have to know that the voice that would scare me out of my skin was Diane's. None of that was findable. None of that was knowable by some stranger. The other thing it could be, I made myself think it, sitting there in the tent with the flashlight in my lap. The other thing it could be was something my dad had told me about once when we were sitting around a fire on a different trip, on a different wash, in a different state. He'd been talking about a Navajo man he'd worked with on the patrol. The man had told him there were certain things out in the country that you didn't talk about much. Things that took shapes, things that learned your name. My dad had not been a believer in much of anything supernatural. He'd been Catholic the way some men are Catholic, by habit and Sunday morning. But he had said, in a tone that was careful, that the Navajo man knew what he was talking about. He had said that if I ever heard a voice in the desert that I knew but shouldn't be there, I should not answer it, should not go to it, should pack up and leave, should not look back. I had been 12. I had laughed. I sat in the tent and I didn't laugh now. "Eddie." The voice was outside the tent. Right outside. Maybe 2 feet from the nylon wall. I sat very still. "Eddie, please, open the tent. I'm cold." It was perfect. It was Diane's voice doing the thing Diane's voice did when she was cold. There was a little hitch in it. There was the way she pulled the word out. I put my hands over my mouth. The voice waited. After a minute it said, "Hannah's not okay, Eddie. I drove out here because Hannah's not okay. You have to come back." I closed my eyes. The thing about Hannah was my soft place. Hannah was the place where I would do anything. The thing outside the tent had figured it out. The thing outside the tent was learning. I made myself think clearly. I made myself think. If Hannah was not okay, Diane would have called me. Diane would have driven to my apartment first. Diane does not know where Bonewash is. Diane has never been to Bonewash. The track down here is not visible from any road. There is no way for Diane to have driven out here. There is no way Hannah is not okay, because if Hannah was not okay, I would feel it, and I do not feel it. What I feel is the wrong thing. What I feel is a thing trying to get me to come out. I opened my eyes. Eddie, please. The voice was beginning to sound tearful. Please, I said, very quietly. You are not my wife. The voice waited. You are not my wife, I said again. My voice sounded steady. I was surprised by how steady it sounded. The voice didn't answer, but the silence after did something I want to try to describe, and I'm not sure I have the words. The silence got bigger. That's the closest I can come. It was as if the air around the tent stopped having any other sound in it. The cottonwoods at the top stopped sighing. There was no insect noise. The owl that had called earlier was gone, or had been gone for a while, and I hadn't noticed. The fire pit outside, which should still have had a coal ticking in it, was silent. Everything sound-shaped in the world had been wiped away, and what was left was a listening. Something out there was listening for what I would do next. I sat there for a long time. I don't know how long. The flashlight was still in my lap. The light was still steady. The night was still still. After what was probably 20 minutes, but might have been an hour, I made myself get up. I made myself unzip the tent. I made myself step out with the flashlight in my hand. There was nothing outside the tent. I looked at the ground. The wash sand was soft enough to take a track, and there was no track. Not a footprint, not a paw print, nothing. Where the voice had been standing, there should have been a shape pressed into the sand, and there was nothing. I walked to my truck. The door was locked. I had locked it when I'd gone to bed because I always lock it. It's a habit from 20 years of working in cities. I unlocked it with the key and got in and turned the engine over. The radio came on. The radio was tuned to KLPX, which is the classic rock station out of Tucson. That was not my station. I keep the radio tuned to the AM news station out of Phoenix because I listen to the morning farm report on long drives, my dad's old habit. The radio was not on the AM news station. It was on KLPX. KLPX was Diane's station. I sat in the truck with my hand on the key and the radio playing a Bob Seger song very quietly, and I looked at the rearview mirror. The rearview mirror was angled wrong. Not by much, by maybe an inch. But it was angled in a way that, if I had been sitting in the driver's seat, would have shown me the back seat instead of the rear window. I reached up slowly and adjusted the mirror. In the second before I touched it, I saw a piece of the back seat in the glass. I saw what looked like, but might have been a shadow, might have been the angle of my flashlight on the upholstery, a shape sitting on the bench, a shape leaning forward, the way a passenger leans forward in the back seat to hear the driver better. I touched the mirror and the shape was not in it. I drove out of Bonewash in the dark. I drove with the headlights on bright. The track up out of the wash was hard to find in the dark, and twice I had to stop and back up and try again. On the second try, when I was reversing slow with the rear lights painting the sand red behind me, I thought I saw something at the edge of the light, something low to the ground, something that moved when the truck moved, the way a coyote moves when it's pacing you. I did not stop to look. I put the truck in drive and I kept going. The dirt road at the top was easier. The gravel was easier still. I rolled the window down a crack so I could hear if anything was running alongside, even though I knew this was the wrong thing to do, even though I knew that what I would hear was what I did not want to hear. I heard the engine and the tires and the cold air coming in. I heard nothing else. The dashboard clock said 4:03. The dashboard clock said 4:19. The dashboard clock said 4:47. I drove without looking at the rearview mirror. I drove without looking at the passenger seat. I kept my eyes on the road, and the road was a long, pale ribbon, and the truck ate it slow. I hit the asphalt of the old Cibola Pass Road around 5:30 in the morning, and I drove east toward Tucson with the radio off and the windows cracked, and I did not look at the rearview mirror. About 15 miles in, I came up behind an 18-wheeler. The rear of the trailer said Big Sky Meat in faded letters. I followed the trailer for 40 minutes, and I have to tell you, the back of that trailer was the most comforting thing I had ever looked at. It was real. It was a man hauling a load. It was something that belonged in the world. I followed the trailer all the way to the on-ramp for Interstate 10, and when the trailer took the ramp west, I felt the loss of it like a death. I got back to my apartment a little after 8. I parked, I went up, I locked the door behind me. I sat down on the couch and I cried for a while, in a way I hadn't cried since my dad died. That should have been the end of it. I want it to be the end of it. I want to say I never went back out to the wash, and I never thought about the voice again, and life moved on and got better. Some of that is true. I did not go back to the wash. I sold the truck a month later because I could not stop looking at the back seat. I bought a Tacoma that had nobody else's seat history. I started seeing Hannah more often. I called her once a week. I started seeing a counselor, a woman named Beth, in a little office near the university who had a Kleenex box on a side table and a print of a desert landscape on the wall that I had to ask her to take down before I could keep. Coming. She took it down. She didn't ask why. I made progress, the way a man can make progress when he decides to. But 3 nights after I came home from Bonewash, I got a call from Diane. It was a little before midnight. I was lying in bed with my phone face down on the nightstand because I was trying to break the habit of checking it. It vibrated. I picked it up. It was Diane. I answered it. I had not answered one of her calls in a week. She said, "Eddie, are you okay?" I said, "Yeah, why?" She said, "Were you out at Bonewash this weekend?" There was a long silence. I sat up. "How do you know that?" I said. She said, "Last night I had a dream. I dreamed I was standing on the rim of the wash. I dreamed I was calling for you. I dreamed you wouldn't come out of the tent." She paused. The line was very quiet. I could hear the refrigerator hum in the kitchen of the old house, the one we'd bought together in 2004, the one she still lived in. And then this morning I woke up and there was sand on my pillow. I didn't know what to say. She said, "Eddie, there was sand on my pillow. Eddie, what did you do?" I told her I didn't know what she was talking about. I told her I had gone to a hotel for the weekend. I told her I was sorry, I had to go, and I hung up. My hands were shaking. She called me back twice that night. I let it ring. The next morning there was a voicemail. I deleted it without listening. She called the morning after that. I let it ring. She called my daughter. Hannah called me and said, "Dad, Mom's worried about you. Are you okay?" I said I was fine. I asked Hannah how school was. She told me about a class. I listened. I told her I loved her. I hung up. I have not been able to talk to Diane since. She's tried. She leaves voicemails. They sound like her. They sound exactly like her. I delete them without listening. I will not put the phone to my ear and hear her say my name. I will not give the thing in the wash a way back in. Beth, the counselor, told me one afternoon that the brain was a remarkable instrument and that under stress it could manufacture sensory experience that was indistinguishable from real. She was being kind. She was being a professional. I let her be both of those things. I did not tell her about the sand on Diane's pillow. I did not tell her that I have 3 different mornings since the wash, woken up to find one of my boots set out by the front door of my apartment when I had put both of them away in the closet the night before. I did not tell her that the boot is always the right one. I did not tell her that the second time it happened, I threw the boot in a dumpster behind a Circle K, and the third time the right boot of a different pair was set out by the door, and the boot I had thrown in the dumpster, I checked, was gone. I sleep with the lamp on now. Beth has not been able to talk me out of it. I have explained to Beth that I am aware it is irrational. I have explained to Beth that I am aware it would not stop the thing, if the thing were real, from doing whatever the thing might do. I have explained to Beth that the lamp is not for the thing. The lamp is for me. The lamp is so that when I open my eyes at 3 in the morning, I can see that the room is the room, and the chair is the chair, and the door is closed. 2 weeks ago, around 3 in the morning, something tapped the window of my apartment. Just one tap. I live on the 3rd floor. I did not get up to look. The lamp is still on, the window still closed, the wash is still where the wash is, and somewhere out in the back country, in a place where I am not, a voice that knows my wife's voice is calling someone else's name into the dark. Story 2. St. Anne's Cienega. The boy had not said anything since we crossed the cattle guard 6 miles back, and that was about right. He had not said much of anything in 8 months, except about practical things, and even those came 1 or 2 words at a time. Yeah, no, okay, got it. I drove and let him be. The radio was on a country station out of Silver City, faint, mostly static, and I could just make out the chorus of a Vince Gill song that I think his mother had liked. I left it on. I kept my eyes on the road, and the road kept getting narrower, and we kept climbing. The country up here is the kind of country a man forgets how to describe after a while. It does not look like the desert he grew up with down south, and it does not look like the high country he saw once in Colorado on a road trip with his wife when they were young. It is its own thing. Oak and juniper and the kind of grass that goes gold in the fall and stays gold through winter. The road cuts of it show red sand and a layer of white clay underneath. Hawks ride on the wind off the rims, and you'll see deer at almost any hour, and the silence is the deepest silence you can find in this state, the kind of silence that gets inside the cab and sits in the back seat with you. St. Anne's Cienega sits in a little fold of country in the southern end of what the maps call the Pine Top Wilderness in southwest New Mexico. To get to it, you take Route 35 out of Glenwood, then a forest road that runs east up into the Mogollons, and then a track that branches off the forest road and doesn't have a sign. You'd never find it if somebody hadn't told you. My uncle had taken me there in 1988, and I had brought Wes there twice when he was small, and now I was bringing him back. The track ends at a turnaround, and from there you walk in about a half-mile down to the Cienega, which is a spring-fed wet meadow that runs maybe 100 yards by 60, with a little creek that comes out the bottom of it and runs down through alder and willow toward a deeper pool where the rainbow trout sit in the cold water under the cut bank. You can fish that pool for the better part of a day and catch the same fish 3 times, and the fish doesn't seem to mind. I parked the truck at the turnaround at a little after 4 in the afternoon on the second Saturday of June. The other vehicle there was a tan Subaru wagon that I figured for a hiker or somebody day tripping. Wes got out and went around to the back of the truck and started pulling gear without me asking. That was something I'd noticed about him in the last few months, that he'd started doing chores without prompting. And I wasn't sure if it was him growing up or if it was him having no energy left for argument. I tried not to think too much about the second one. My name is Frank Hollander. I'm 52. I was a deputy sheriff in Pima County for 27 years, and I retired in 2024 because my knee gave out on a stairs call and the doctor said it was time. My wife Margie was diagnosed with ovarian cancer 4 months after I retired, and she died 10 months after that in October of the next year. She had been the kind of woman who could hold 3 conversations at once and remember everyone's birthday without writing them down. She had been 49. We had one son, Wes, who is now 15, who plays bass guitar in a high school band, who got his learner's permit last month, who has not cried that I have seen since the funeral, who has been carrying a kind of stillness with him that I don't know how to put my finger on, but that worries me more than the crying would. I had been married to Margie for 19 years. I had met her in 2006 at the hospital cafeteria when she was an ER nurse, and I was waiting on the report on a domestic that I had just brought in. She had asked me if I wanted cream in my coffee, and I had said yes, and she had said, "Good, you're not one of those black coffee guys." Those guys are all assholes. And I had laughed in a way that surprised me, because it had been a hard week. We had gotten married 8 months later in a small ceremony in her parents' backyard in Tucson. Her father had been a phone company lineman. Her mother had been a third-grade teacher. They were good, plain people, and they had taken me in like a son, and they had both died before Margie did, which was a small mercy. Margie was an only child. So when she died, there was only Wes and me. The thing about losing your wife is that you don't lose her in one shape. You lose her in 100 shapes, in 1,000 small absences that catch you at different times in different rooms. The way she used to leave her coffee cup on the second shelf of the dishwasher when I always wanted it on the top. The smell of the shampoo she'd used for 10 years. The sound her keys made in the bowl by the door. Each one is a small ambush. After a while you start to know where the ambushes are. After a while you can walk through the house and avoid most of them. The trouble is the ones that find you when you weren't expecting them, a song on the radio you didn't think she liked, a Vince Gill song coming in scratchy from a station 90 miles away in the high country, and your boy in the passenger seat not saying anything, because he's hearing it too. I had taken Wes to St. Anne's because I didn't know what else to do. We walked the half-mile in with our packs and the fishing rods. The trail goes through a stand of ponderosa pines that smell like vanilla when you put your nose to the bark, and then it opens up into the meadow. And the meadow has the cienega in the middle of it, with the long grass moving slow in the wind. There were 2 ravens up high. There was a red-tailed hawk farther off. Wes saw the cienega and stopped for a second. He had been 6 the last time we'd been here. He had probably forgotten the look of it. "That's it," I said. He nodded. We set up camp on the south edge of the meadow, where there's a fire ring somebody had built years ago and a flat spot for 2 tents. I had brought 2 tents, 'cause I figured the boy was at the age where he wanted his own space. He pitched his without asking for help, and I pitched mine. And we put the food in the bear bag and hung it from a high branch on a ponderosa about 100 yards downstream. And we drank water from our canteens and looked at the cienega. "You want to fish before dinner?" I said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah." We walked down to the pool. The water was the color of weak tea, dark on top, and you could see down into it where the gravel was. Wes had a fly rod his mother had bought him for his 12th birthday, an Orvis, a nice one. He rigged it without me looking. I had my old Eagle Claw spinning rod that I had bought, used in 1991, and that I had never replaced, because nothing was wrong with it. Wes false cast twice and dropped a hopper pattern on the seam at the head of the pool, and a trout took it in about 3 seconds. The boy played it well. He brought it in, and we looked at it together, a brown, about 12 inches, the dots on its side the color of dried blood, and he wet his hand and slipped it back in. "Good fish," I said. "Yeah." We fished until the light got long. Wes caught 3 more and lost 1. I caught 2. We walked back up to the camp in the dusk, and I lit the fire and we cooked hot dogs on sticks because that's what we used to do when his mother came, and we ate them with the buns and yellow mustard. He asked me for another one and I gave it to him. He ate 3 in total. That was a good sign. He had not been eating enough since the funeral. While we were sitting by the fire, a man walked into our camp. He came up from the direction of the creek, walking easy, like a man who had been camped nearby and was just out for a stroll and had seen our fire. He was maybe 60. He wore canvas trousers and a tan button-down shirt and a wide-brimmed straw hat. He carried a walking stick made out of what looked like a piece of mesquite, dark wood with a knob at the top. He had a neat gray beard. He smiled at us as he came up to the firelight. "Mind if I sit?" he said. I had been a deputy long enough to read men, and there was nothing in him that pinged me. He had the easy manner of a retired schoolteacher, which is what he was, as it turned out. I waved him to the third log. "I'm Frank," I said. "This is my son Wes." "Doyle," he said. He sat down with the kind of careful, slow that older men do. He set the walking stick across his knees. "I've been camped about a quarter mile up. Been here 2 weeks. You're the first folks I've seen besides a hiker on Tuesday." 2 weeks is a long time. "I'm retired," he said, and smiled. Wife passed 3 years ago. The house got too quiet. I've been doing a stretch of trips like this all spring. Came down out of Colorado in April. I'll head back north when the weather here gets hot. What did you do? I said. Taught 5th grade in El Paso for 34 years. Now I read books and walk and fish badly. He laughed. There was a Coleman cooler next to him, tan and white, that I noticed when he set the stick across his knees. It was a big one, the 70-quart. It was brand new. The hinges had no scuff on them. The plastic still had the texture that wears off in the first week of use. He had been camped for 2 weeks. The cooler was not a thing that had been with him 2 weeks. I let it go. There are men who buy new gear for every trip. There are men who like the smell of new plastic. I had been a deputy long enough to know that something out of place was not always something wrong. Sometimes it was a man who had recently come into money. Sometimes it was a man who had just lost a wife and was treating himself. Wes was looking at the man with the careful look he had for strangers, which was a look I had seen him use since he was 4. Margie used to say Wes looked at people the way an old dog looks at people, assessing whether they were going to feed him or kick him. Doyle looked at Wes. How old are you, son? 15, Wes said. He said it without looking up. Tough age, Doyle said. I taught 5th grade. Tougher than that in some ways. They're still young enough to be honest 5th graders. You're old enough to know what's coming. Wes looked up. There was an interest there I hadn't seen in months. What is coming? Wes said. Oh, said Doyle. You know, the usual. Heartbreak, disappointment, long stretches when you can't figure out why you should bother. Then a good day. Then heartbreak again. Then a good day. Then a long stretch. Then more good days than you knew you had coming. By the time you get to my age, you stop being surprised by either kind. Wes nodded slowly. The boy was listening, really listening, the way he had used to listen to his mother when she talked about something hard. I felt a small, tired gratitude for the old man across the fire. I felt the gratitude even as something in the back of my mind was working at the cooler, at the brand new cooler, at the question of why a man would haul a 70-quart cooler the half-mile down to a Cienega when he was camped a quarter-mile farther up. I'm sorry about your mother, Doyle said. The fire popped. I felt my back stiffen. I had not told Doyle about Margie. I had not said the word mother. Wes had said yeah and no, almost nothing else. There was no way Doyle could have known. I tried to keep my face the way it had been. I am good at that. I was a deputy a long time. How did you know about Margie? I said. I said it level. Doyle looked at me. His face was lit on one side by the fire and shadowed on the other. He smiled in a slow, considered way. You're wearing your ring, he said, and the boy's wearing a band around his wrist that says, in loving memory. I saw it when he was casting. The dates on the band would put the loss at less than a year ago. The boy's body language tells me it was his mother and not a sibling or grandparent. There's a particular shape to that grief in a teenage boy. I'm sorry. I should have said something less direct. Old teacher habit. I looked at Wes's wrist. He was wearing the band. I had not noticed it that day, but he had been wearing it for months. The dates were on it. They were embossed. I let my breath out slow. He's an observant old man, I told myself. He read you like a deputy reads a witness. That's all. It's fine, I said. Just startled me. Forgive me, Doyle said. He looked at Wes. I won't bring it up again, son. Your father will tell you about it when he's ready, and you'll tell him about it when you're ready, and neither of you should be in a rush. Now, have you caught a fish yet? 5, Wes said. Good Lord, you're a lot better than me. Doyle smiled. Maybe I'll bring my rod down tomorrow morning and you can show me what you're doing. Sure, Wes said. Doyle stayed about 20 more minutes. He talked easy. He didn't ask anything more about Margie, didn't pry into anything. He told a story about a 5th grade boy who had brought a snake to school in a thermos in 1991, and Wes laughed, which was the first laugh I had heard out of the boy in I couldn't remember how long. When Doyle got up to go, he leaned on the walking stick and said, I'm camped up by the upper meadow. You'll see the tent if you walk that way tomorrow. Come by if you want coffee. I make it strong. Thanks, I said. We watched him walk off into the dark. He had no flashlight. I thought that was a little odd, but the moon was up and the sky was clear and the meadow was bright, and a man who'd been out here 2 weeks would have his night vision dialed in. After he was gone, Wes said, quietly, "He's nice." Yeah? Wes was quiet for a minute. Then he said, "He smelled funny." I looked at him. The fire was low. The boy's face was half in light and half in shadow, the way Doyle's had been. "Funny how?" "I don't know," Wes said. "Like a closet." I considered that. I had not noticed any smell. But Wes had always had a better nose than me. Margie used to say his nose was the most useful thing in the family. "He's been camping for 2 weeks," I said. "Could be that." "Yeah," Wes said. We turned in around 10. I lay in my tent and listened to the meadow. There were frogs in the cienega, a steady throb of them. There was an owl somewhere far off. There was the creek. I thought about Margie, and how she would have liked Doyle, and how she would have asked him about the fifth graders for an hour, and he would have loved every minute of it. And I felt the loss of her again the way I felt it now, like a hand pressing down on the top of my chest. I went to sleep. I woke up because Wes was unzipping his tent. The luminous hands on my watch said 2:17. I lay still and listened. He was getting out. I heard the rustle of him stepping into his boots. I heard the sound of him standing up. There is a sound a person's boots make in pine duff that I knew well from 27 years of walking up on people in dark places. He took 6 steps. He stopped. I could hear him breathing through his mouth, the way a kid breathes when he's congested or just stopped running. He was facing away from my tent. I knew that without seeing it. I unzipped my tent quietly and looked out. Wes was standing in the middle of the camp looking up at the upper meadow. "Wes," I said. He turned. His face was pale in the moonlight. He was not blinking. The wind was moving the grass in the meadow behind him, and the grass was making a sound, but the sound was just a little off, the way a recording of something is just a little off when it's been played back too many times. "I have to go up there," he said. "Why?" "He's calling me." I sat up fast. "Who?" "Doyle." He looked at me. His eyes had that distance in them that sleeping people get. He said, "Come up. He has something to tell me about Mom." I got out of the tent. I pulled my boots on. I went to the boy and put my hands on his shoulders. His shoulders felt cold under his t-shirt, the way a thing feels cold that's been outside longer than it should have been. He had not been outside long. He had stepped out of the tent maybe a minute earlier. He should have been warm. "Wes," I said. "Wes, look at me." His eyes drifted to me. They did not quite focus. He said, "Come up," Wes said. "He has to tell me." "Wes, you hear me. You sit down by the fire. You do not move. You sit down. That's an order." The word order was something Margie and I had used with him since he was small. It was a code word. It meant we were not asking. The boy blinked. His eyes focused. He looked at me. Then he looked at the fire ring. "Why are we outside?" he said. "You were sleepwalking." "I don't sleepwalk." "You were tonight." He sat down by the fire ring. His shoulders started to shake. I built the fire back up and put a blanket around him. I sat next to him. He didn't cry, exactly, but he was breathing in a tight, jagged way. "Dad," he said, "I dreamed Mom was up at the upper meadow. I dreamed she was sitting in a chair with the man from earlier. I dreamed she was waiting for me." "Okay," I said. "She was wearing the sweater she wore that one Christmas, the green one." I knew the sweater. Margie had worn it Christmas 2019, when Wes was 9. She had complained that it itched. I knew it because I had bought it. I had picked it out, and she had pretended to like it. The sweater had been donated to a Goodwill in Tucson 9 days after her funeral, along with the rest of her clothes, by a friend of hers named Carla, because I had not been able to do it myself. Wes had not known the sweater was gone. He had not been in our closet in months. He had not asked about our clothes. "Okay," I said. "It felt real. I know." We sat there until the fire was good and high. The boy fell asleep against my shoulder around 4. I let him sleep. I watched the upper meadow. the dark line of trees where it bordered the cienega, the place where Doyle's tent was supposed to be. I did not see a tent. I did not see a fire. I did not see anything except the dark. But twice, while the boy slept against me, I thought I heard a voice from up there. Once it sounded like a woman's voice, calling a name, but the name was at a distance, and I could not make it out. The second time it sounded like a man's voice, and the man was laughing softly, and the laugh sounded familiar in a way I did not want to examine. I pulled the blanket up around the boy, and I tightened my grip on the small folding knife I had taken out of my pack, and I stayed very still and let the laugh go on for as long as it wanted, and after a while it stopped. When dawn came, I let the boy stay sleeping, and I walked up to the upper meadow. There was no tent. There was no fire ring. There was no sign that anyone had camped there for years. The grass was uncrushed. The brush was undisturbed. There were no boot prints anywhere along the deer trail that ran up to it. The cienega in the upper meadow was smaller than the lower, and the spring that fed it ran out from under a rock face, and there was nothing there but the spring and the grass and a couple of mule deer that lifted their heads and watched me come. I stood at the edge of the meadow for a long time. The deer did not bolt. That was the thing I came back to later, that the deer did not bolt. Mule deer in the high country do not stand and watch a man walk up on them. They throw their heads up, they bounce off. In that long jumpy way they have, they crash through brush. These two stood and watched me. They watched me with the kind of attention you'd expect from something with more inside its head than a deer ought to have. I held very still, and they held very still, and after a while one of them turned and walked off slowly toward the trees, and the other one followed, and I walked the perimeter of the meadow and found nothing. Not a wrapper, not a print, not a broken twig, nothing that said any human had set foot there for a very long time. I walked back down. I sat by the dead fire. Wes was still asleep on the log. When he woke up, he didn't remember anything past going to bed the night before. I did not tell him. I made breakfast. I made it slow. While we were eating, he said, "Are we going to fish today?" "I think we're going to head out," I said. "I'm not feeling right. Could be I'm coming down with something." He looked at me. He had not been a stupid kid ever. "Dad, what's going on?" I looked at him. "There was a man here last night," I said. "By the fire. Do you remember him?" "Yeah. Doyle. Do you remember what he looked like?" Wes thought. "Tall. Beard. Hat. He had that stick." "Do you remember what he said? Anything specific?" Wes thought longer. His face changed. His face got the look it had had when he'd stood up in the camp at 217. "Dad," he said, "he didn't say anything about Mom, did he?" "He did. He said he was sorry about her. He said he saw your bracelet." "I'm not wearing a bracelet." I looked at his wrist. He was not wearing a bracelet. "You were wearing one last night." "Dad, I haven't worn a bracelet since the funeral. The thing they gave us, I put it in my drawer. I sat there with the eggs going cold in front of me." "All right," I said. "We're going to pack up." We packed up. We did not run, exactly, but we did not dawdle. The boy was quiet, and the kind of quiet he was being was a useful kind. He moved with intention. He did not ask more questions. When we were carrying the gear back up the trail to the truck, the trail seemed longer than it had on the way in, and the ponderosa pines did not smell like vanilla anymore. They smelled like nothing. I had the bear bag rope tied around my wrist because the bag was over one shoulder and the cordage was loose, and at one point on the trail I felt the rope tug. I stopped. The rope went slack. I looked back. Wes was 30 feet behind me, not touching it. There was nothing else for the rope to be caught on. "Keep moving," I said. We got to the truck. I locked the doors before he had even shut his. I started the engine. I drove the track out to the forest road faster than I'd come in, and the Subaru that had been parked at the turnaround was still there, and I felt a cold thing in my stomach when I saw it, because that was the wrong thing, to be still there. It had been there when we'd arrived the day before. It had still been there at 4 in the afternoon. It was still there at 9 the next morning. A day tripper does not leave their car for 20 hours. The Subaru had a thin layer of dust on it, the kind that builds up over weeks. The tires looked low. There was a coffee cup wedged in the dirt by the driver's side door, the foam kind from a gas station, and the cup was sun-bleached. There were pine needles on the hood. The Subaru had not been driven up here yesterday. It had been there a long time. Months, maybe longer. I did not stop to check. I drove down the forest road and onto the asphalt of Route 35 and out toward Glenwood. The radio came on by itself, on a station I had not set. It was a country station. The song that was playing was the Vince Gill song that Margie had liked. I reached over and turned the radio off. The radio came back on 3 miles later. The song was different, but the station was the same. I turned it off again. The third time it came back on, I pulled the fuse for it. Wes watched me without saying anything. Wes did not say anything for 30 miles after that. Around mile 15 of the drive, he said, "Dad." "Yeah?" "What did the man look like?" "Doyle. What did he look like to you?" I told him. Wes was quiet for a long time. He looked out the window at the high country sliding by. Then he said, "He looked like Grandpa to me." I gripped the wheel hard. His grandfather, my father, had been dead since 2009. The boy had not been born yet when his grandfather had passed. There were 2 photographs of his grandfather in the house. There was a portrait from his retirement from the railroad in 1998. There was a candid one from a fishing trip in the 70s. They were the only photographs of his grandfather, Wes, had ever seen. I drove. I did not say anything else about it. I asked the boy if he wanted to stop for breakfast in Glenwood, and he said yes, and we did, and we ate biscuits and gravy at a place called Alma's, and the woman at the counter was kind, and the place smelled like coffee and frying eggs and bacon, and after we ate, I felt the world settle back down. I paid the check. The waitress put her hand on Wes's shoulder, the way some waitresses will with a kid who looks like he's having a hard day, and she said, "You take care of your daddy, sweetheart." And Wes said, "Yes, ma'am," and I had to look away. We drove home to Tucson. We got there at 9 that night. For 3 weeks after, nothing happened. Wes went back to school. He talked more than he had been. He told me one night at dinner that he had decided he wanted to take Spanish next year because his mother had spoken Spanish with her abuela and he wanted to be able to speak it with somebody. I told him that was a good idea. He smiled, the first real smile in 8 months. And the smile made me hurt and also made me feel like there was a road forward. He played his bass guitar in the garage one afternoon, an Iron Maiden bass line he had been working on before his mother got sick, and the sound of him playing it again was the sound of a thing coming back to life that I had not expected to come back. I sat in the kitchen with a beer and listened. I did not go out and tell him I was listening. I did not want him to stop. After a while, the playing stopped on its own, and he came inside and went to his room without saying anything, and that was all right. The fact that he had played all was a thing I would have given a great deal for 3 weeks before. His grades came up. His friends started coming around again. There was a girl, a quiet kid named Alma, who he had been close with before everything. She came over one Saturday, and they sat on the back porch and ate string cheese and laughed about something on her phone, and the laugh was real, and I stayed in the kitchen and let it be. 3 weeks to the day after St. Anne's, I got up at 3:42 in the morning to use the bathroom, and I walked past the kitchen, and Wes was standing in there. He was standing in the spot where Margie used to stand at the stove. He was facing the stove. The stove was off. He was not moving. I stood at the edge of the kitchen and watched him. "Wes," I said. He did not move. "Wes." His head turned. Just his head. His body stayed facing the stove. His head turned 90 degrees on his neck, and his face was at the angle a face shouldn't be at, and his eyes were on me. He smiled. It was a smile I had not seen on his face before. It was a smile I had seen once on a man's face by a fire in a cienega in southwestern New Mexico, with the firelight catching one side and the shadow taking the other. Then he blinked. His head came back to normal. His shoulders sagged. "Dad," he said. His voice was thick. His voice was sleep. What time is it?" "It's late," I said. "Go back to bed." He looked at me. He looked at his hands. He shook his head, slow, like a man clearing it. I had a dream, he said. I dreamed I was watching us cook. Mom was at the stove. I was watching. It's all right, I said. Go to bed, son. He went. I stood in the kitchen for a long time. The clock on the microwave said 3:44. The dog we have, a chocolate lab named Mose, who is 12 years old and arthritic, came out of the laundry room where he sleeps and stood next to me. He was looking down the hallway toward Wes's room. The hair on his back was up. He growled. Low, steady. I did not go down the hallway to check. I have not gone down the hallway to check in the 3 nights since. I have gone to bed and turned the light on in the hallway and locked the bedroom door from the inside, which is a thing I have not done in this house in 20 years. The dog sleeps at the foot of the bed now. He used to sleep in the laundry room. He came on his own. I did not call him. Wes is fine. Wes is in school. Wes has a friend over sometimes. Wes laughs at his shows on his laptop. Wes is fine, by every measure that I can apply. But sometimes, at night, the dog stands in the hallway and growls at nothing, and I lie in bed and I think about the upper meadow with no fire ring. And I think about a Subaru wagon at turnaround for 20 hours. And I think about the way my son's head turned 90 degrees on his neck. I have been a peace officer most of my adult life. I have walked into homes where the worst thing in the world had just happened. I have stood in rooms where the air had a weight to it from what had been done in those rooms. I have learned over 27 years to listen to the part of me that knows when something is wrong without being able to tell me why. That part of me, that quiet part, the part that kept me alive on 100 calls, has been very quiet around Wes since we got home. Quiet but not silent. Quiet in the way it gets in a room where the thing you're afraid of is sitting in the chair across from you, watching, behaving, biting. I called Carla, Margie's friend, 2 weeks after the trip. I asked her about Margie's clothes. I asked her, very casually, if she remembered the green Christmas sweater. She did. She said she had specifically remembered putting it in the Goodwill bag because she'd known that I would have hated to do it myself. I said, right, of course. That's what I figured. I asked her where the Goodwill was. She told me. I drove there one afternoon when Wes was at school. I asked the woman at the counter if they kept records of what had been donated. She laughed at me kindly. She said, no, of course not. She said the bags came in and got priced and went out. She said the sweater had probably been bought a long time ago by somebody who wanted a green Christmas sweater for cheap. She said this was a comfort, usually, to people who came in looking for things their dead had owned. I thanked her and left. I I leave a light on in the hallway now, and I have not been back to the Cienega, and I will not go. Story 3. Caballero Mesa. The first whining woke me up a little after midnight on the 4th night, and I lay in the tent on the camp cot, and I listened to it, and I told myself it was a coyote pup. Coyote pups make a sound when they're separated from the den that is not very different from the sound a dog makes when it's old and lonely and wants to be let in. The mistake is an honest one if you've never spent time with both, and I had spent time with both. The mistake was still an honest one to make at midnight on a mesa 20 miles from any human being, when the wind had been working at the rain fly for 2 hours, and you were tired enough that your eyes hurt. The whining came again. It came from about 30 feet outside the tent, off in the direction of the truck. It went on for maybe a minute. Then it stopped. I lay there. The wind kept doing what it was doing. The fly kept moving. I had been working a 14-day rotation on Caballero Mesa, drilling core samples for a company called White Hill Minerals out of Denver, and I was halfway through, and I was tired in a way that bone tired didn't quite cover. I had been alone on the mesa since the day I drove up. I closed my eyes. I told myself coyote pup. I told myself I was hearing what I wanted to hear, and the truth of what I wanted to hear was that I was missing my dog. I had been missing him for 2 months and 3 days, and I was not over it. I had not expected to be this not over it. He had been 15, which is old for a lab mix, and I had thought, in the months before he died, that I had been preparing myself. I had not been. The whining came back. I sat up. It was the exact whine. That's the thing I want to say first, before I say anything else, because that's the thing the brain wants to argue with and lose to. It was the exact whine. It was the whine Bandit had made the last 6 months of his life when he wanted to come up on the bed, the small whine in the back of the throat that had grown smaller and sadder the older he got. It was not like the whine. It was the whine. The same little hitch at the end. The same broken pitch in the middle where his throat had a thing going on that the vet had said would not affect his quality of life and had in the end affected his quality of life. I got out of the cot. I pulled on my jeans and my boots. I went out of the tent with the lantern, the big propane lantern I used for the camp. Nothing out there. The truck was where I had parked it. The drill rig was tarped against the wind. The mesa was the mesa, the dark scrub running off in every direction, the rim, a darker line against the sky to the west. There were stars, plenty of stars. There was no moon, because it had set already. I held the lantern up, and I walked a slow circle around the camp. When I came back to the front of the tent, I saw the prints. They were dog prints. They were the right size for a dog, about Bandit's size. They were old dog prints, the way an old dog's prints register, with the right rear pad dragging just a little, a smudge, instead of a print. Bandit's right rear leg had gone bad in the last 2 years. He'd developed a gait where he was favoring it, and his right rear pad would scuff the ground instead of lifting cleanly. The prints in the dust by my tent had that exact scuff. I knelt down. I held the lantern close. The prints ran in from the dark north of the camp, came right up to the tent door, sat there for a minute. The prints sat there, 4 of them in a square, the right size for a dog, sitting and waiting, and then turned and went back the way they had come. I followed them with the lantern for maybe 20 yards north, and then they ended, just stopped. There was no break in the soil. The prints went 4, 3, 2, 1, none, like the dog had stepped off into the air. I went back to the tent. I sat on the cot. I put the lantern on the floor. My name is Marcus Webb. I am 38. I am a contract geologist working mostly on exploration for small mining outfits in the Four Corners region, although I'll take work anywhere they'll fly me. I grew up in a town in southwestern Colorado called Mancos, which is real and which most people have never heard of. And I went to Colorado School of Mines on a scholarship and a string of student loans. I am still paying off. I have one son, Tyler, who is 16, who lives with my ex-wife, Janelle, in Albuquerque. Tyler and I have not been good for the last year. I picked a fight at Christmas that I should not have picked. I was supposed to drive down to see him over Memorial Day, the long weekend before the White Hill contract started, and Janelle had texted me on the Thursday to say that Tyler had made other plans, and I had not pushed it, because that was easier. The fight at Christmas had been about a phone. I want to be honest about that. I had said something about how much time he spent on it and how he and I had not done anything together in 2 years that did not involve a screen, and he had said I was the one who had not come around to do anything. He had been right. I had reacted to him being right by getting louder. I had said a thing or two I should not have said. Janelle had not yelled at me, which had been worse than if she had. She had walked into the next room with Tyler and closed the door, and I had stood in the kitchen for a while looking at the gingerbread house Tyler had built when he was 8, which Janelle still set out every year on the kitchen counter, and I had gone out to my truck and driven the 4 hours back to my apartment without saying goodbye. I had an old yellow lab mix named Bandit, who I had picked up from a shelter in Durango in 2010. He was 3 when I got him and not what anyone had been looking for. He had been a kick dog. The first 6 months he lived with me, he did not let me touch him on his right side. By year 2, he had figured out I was not going to hurt him, and he was the best dog I had ever had. He died of kidney failure in March, on a folded blanket in my truck on the way to the vet. I had been driving him up to Durango because the vet in Lobo Crossing did not see weekend hours. He had died about 10 miles short of the clinic. I had not told Tyler. Tyler had loved that dog. I had not been able to figure out how to make the call. I had taken the White Hill contract because the money was good and because being alone in the field was the thing I had always liked, and because I did not want to be in my apartment where the food bowl was still in the corner and where I kept catching myself listening for bandits' nails on the linoleum. The work was straightforward. Whitehill thought there was a rare earth deposit on the south face of Caballero Mesa in an old uranium claim that had been worked through the 70s and abandoned in 1981. They wanted core samples from a grid of points along the south rim and one transect across the top. 2 weeks of work for one man, $12,000. They had given me a sat phone, a small drill rig that ran off a generator, and a list of grid points to hit. I had set up camp on the third night near the center of the top transect, where the wind off the rim was steady but not too bad, and where I had a view of the mesa edge and the long fall down to the BLM track. The first 3 nights had been quiet. The fourth was the one. I sat on the cot for a while. The lantern threw a hard light on the tent walls. The wind kept working. I told myself the prince could be a coyote. I told myself coyotes have a dragging gait sometimes if they've been hurt. I told myself a coyote following a den smell could come right up to a man's tent if it was hungry enough. I told myself a lot of things. I did not believe any of them. I did not sleep again that night. I sat on the cot with the lantern on and a small camp folding knife in my lap, and I waited for the whining to come back, and it did not. Around 4:30 the wind died, and the mesa went very quiet. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear the small ticks of the lantern. I could hear, very far off to the north, what might have been a coyote, but the coyote was a coyote, and the sound it made was a coyote sound. I knew the difference now. At first light, I went out and walked the camp perimeter again with the lantern off and the daylight coming up. The prints were still there. They were not deer prints. They were not coyote prints. They were dog prints. They came in and they stopped and they turned around and they went back and they ended where they ended, 20 yards out in the middle of bare dust where there should have been more. I ate breakfast. Oatmeal from a packet, hot water from the camp stove. I drank black coffee. I ate the oatmeal looking at the prints. I drank the coffee looking at the prints. Then I got out the GPS and went to my first grid point for the day, which was about a mile south on the rim, and I worked. I worked all day. The drill rig was loud, which I liked. The loudness was a thing to be inside of. I pulled 3 core samples that day. They came up clean, the way uranium country samples come up clean, pale sandstone, a few thin streaks of darker mineral, the kind of cores you label and box and ship and let the lab figure out. I worked until the sun was getting low and the rim threw a long shadow across the top of the mesa, and then I packed up and drove the truck back to camp. I made a fire that second evening. I had not made one the first 3. There was no real reason to. The propane stove cooked my food, and the lantern gave me light, and a fire on the mesa in dry season was a thing you did not start unless you needed to. I needed to. I wanted to see something move that I could explain. Fire moves, and fire's honest. I sat by it and I drank coffee, and I watched the dark come down over the rim, and I tried not to look north of camp. That second night the whining started a little after 11. It came from the same direction. North of the tent. It came closer this time. It came to about 10 feet outside the tent door, and it sat there, and it whined. I did not get up. I lay in the cot with the small folding knife in my hand, and I listened. The whine had a quality I had not noticed the night before. There was a kind of asking in it. There was a kind of please. Bandit had whined like that the last week of his life, when he had wanted to get up on the bed and could not, when he had wanted me to lift him. I had lifted him every time. I lifted him at 3 in the morning, and at 5, and at 6, and at any time he asked, because the doctor had said 2 weeks, and I had wanted him to know, every minute of those 2 weeks, that I had not stopped. The whine outside the tent had that asking in it. I did not get up. After a while, the whining stopped. I heard the prince leaving. I want to say that carefully. I heard the sound of the prince. I heard them step away from the tent, one at a time, in the right rhythm for the gait band it had had. The fourth step had a scuff in it. The fifth had a scuff. After about 20 steps, the sound stopped. I lay in the cot until dawn. The third day I worked. I worked hard. I pulled 4 cores. I came back exhausted. I ate canned chili from a can. I lay down at 9. I did not hear the whining that night, or if I did, I did not remember. The fourth night was the one I have already told you about, the whining and the lantern and the prints that ended in the middle of bare dust. I went out and broke camp at first light. I packed the truck. I drove down off the mesa on the road I had come up, and at the bottom of the road, where it joined the BLM track that ran east toward Lobo Crossing, the road was not where I had left it. That's the only way I know how to say this. The road I had driven up had 2 switchbacks down the south face of the mesa. I had driven them 4 days ago. I had counted them, because I was a man who counted things on a road I might have to drive in the dark. There had been 2. When I drove down that morning, there were 3. The third one came after the first 2, and it took the road east, around a piece of mesa that I had not noticed on the way up. The road I knew should have run straight south from the second switchback to the BLM track. Now there was a third switchback, and the road went east, and I followed it because I did not know what else to do. The road ran east for about a quarter mile. Then it bent north. Then it ended at a camp. The camp was my camp. The tent was my tent, set up the way I had set it up. The drill rig was tarped the way I had tarped it. The truck I looked in the rearview mirror to confirm, and the truck I was sitting in was still a truck I was sitting in. A 2014 GMC Sierra with a dent in the right rear quarter panel from a parking lot in Gallup, and the truck at the camp was also a 2014 GMC Sierra with a dent in the right rear quarter panel from a parking lot in Gallup. I sat in the cab for a long time. The engine was running. The air conditioning was on because the morning was already getting hot. I looked at the camp for what was probably 10 minutes before I did anything. I looked at the way the rain fly was tied off on the windward corner, with the half hitch I used and the extra wrap I used, because I had once had a fly come loose in a storm in the Bisty, and I had got into the habit of the extra wrap. The fly on the camp in front of me had the extra wrap. The angle of the wrap was my angle. The way the cord came out of the grommet was my way. I looked at the drill rig. The tarp on the drill rig was tied down at the 4 corners with my knots. There is no such thing as a knot that is unique to one man, but a man who has worked outside for 20 years ties his knots in a particular way, with the same little twist of the wrist on the second pass, and the knots on the tarp had my twist. I looked at the cooler. The cooler was a blue Coleman, the older 5-day model, with a scuff on the lid, where I had set it down on a rock outside Window Rock in 2019 and gouged the plastic. The cooler in the camp had the same scuff, same shape, same place on the lid. I want to say this clearly. The camp was not similar to mine. The camp was mine. Every detail of it was mine. The way the tent door was zipped half open at the bottom, which I do because I like the air to move through, but I do not like the bugs. The way the lantern was hung on the carabiner. The way the boots, when I had boots there, would have sat just to the left of the door, and where the dust showed the print of where boots had sat just to the left of the door. The boot print was the print of my boots, a Red Wing pattern I had been buying for 15 years. Eventually, I shut the engine off. I got out, I walked over to the camp, I went into the tent. The tent was empty. There was no cot. There was no sleeping bag. There were no boots. The tent was set up, but it had not been lived in. There was a smell. I want to be careful about this. I do not want to be melodramatic. The smell was the smell of a freezer that had been unplugged for a week and was beginning, in the back of it, where the meat was, to start the long slide. It was not a strong smell. It was strong enough that I noticed it. I noticed it standing inside a tent that I had stood inside the night before, that had not smelled of anything at the time. There was something else I noticed, and I am going to say it now, because if I do not say it now, I will leave it out, and I do not want to leave it out. The dust on the floor of the tent had been disturbed. Not In a human way, there were marks in the dust like a dog had lain down in the middle of the tent, a circle of disturbed dust about the size of a dog bandit's size. The marks of where the dog had turned, the way dogs turn before they lie down, 3 times around and then settle. The dust at the center of the circle was pressed flat. The dust at the edge of the circle was kicked out. I left the tent. I walked back to the truck, to my truck, the one I had driven, the one that was the only truck, and I got in. The road I had come in on was no longer there. I looked. There was the camp in front of me. There was scrub. There was no road behind me. The thing I had driven down was gone. I sat for a while. I tried to think clearly. I was an educated man. I had a degree from one of the better schools of mines in the country. I worked in a field that required me to read the land in a particular way. I knew what a real road looked like, and I knew what hallucination looked like, and the thing I had driven down had been a real road. I started the engine. I drove the only direction I could drive, which was forward, past the camp, into the scrub. About 50 yards in, I was on the BLM track, just like that. The mesa was behind me. The track ran east. The sun was up over my left shoulder. I drove out. About an hour out, I started hearing the whining again. This was a thing I have to describe carefully, too. It was not coming from outside the truck. It was coming from inside, from the back seat. The back seat of my truck is a bench, and I had the rear part of my gear back there in a duffel bag and a hard case with the core samples. The whining was coming from somewhere in the bench, like a dog was hidden under the gear, like a dog had got into the truck while I was inside the tent. There was no dog in the truck. I checked. I pulled over on the track and I got out, and I opened the back door, and I unloaded the gear onto the dirt, and I looked. There was no dog. The bench was empty. The whining did not stop while I was looking. It came from the bench. It came from the empty bench. When I closed the door and got back in, the whining stopped. I drove. And the truck got hot in the way trucks get hot on a desert morning, and the air conditioner kept up, and I kept my eyes on the road. The track was 20 miles long. It came out at a state road that ran into Lobo Crossing. Lobo Crossing has a population of about 400. There is a Phillips 66, a small grocery, a bar called The Hub, 2 churches, and an elementary school that serves the whole county. I pulled into the Phillips 66 at about 9:45 in the morning, and I parked the truck in the shade of the canopy, and I went inside and bought a Coke and a bag of beef jerky, and I sat down at the small table in the corner where the gas station kept a coffee pot and a stack of styrofoam cups. I sat there for about 30 minutes. The whining had stopped when I got out of the truck. It had not come back. The Phillips 66 in Lobo Crossing was the kind of place where you could tell time by who came in. The early shift at the county roads department had cleared out at 6, and the gas station was running on the slow trade. The retirees coming in for their lottery tickets, the long-haul drivers coming off the state road for a coffee and a piss, the occasional ranch hand picking up a Gatorade and a bag of ice. I knew the rhythm because I had drilled in counties like this for 15 years. The rhythm was a thing you could lean on. A woman came in around 10 and got coffee. She nodded at me. I nodded back. She left. A man in a White Hill Minerals shirt came in around 10:30, which startled me until I realized he was the gas station's own man. They had the contract for fueling the company trucks, and he was just there to refill the diesel pump. He nodded at me too. He left. I sat there. Around 11, I called White Hill on the satellite phone they had given me for the contract. I told the dispatch woman that I was off the mesa with a family emergency. She asked which family member. I said my son. She said she was sorry to hear it. She told me they would dispatch a relief geologist on the back half of the contract, and I would be paid pro rata for the days I had worked. I thanked her. I hung up. I drove down to Albuquerque that afternoon. It is a 4-hour drive. I called Janelle from a rest stop near Grants. I said, "Can I see Tyler tonight?" She said, "Marcus, what's going on?" I said, "Nothing's going on. I just want to see him. I'll buy you both dinner." I'll buy you all the dinner you want." She was quiet for a minute. She said, "Are you drinking?" I said, "No, I'm not drinking. I haven't had a drink in 8 months." That was true. She knew it was true. She said, "Come at 7. He's been studying for finals." "Don't make it weird." I said I wouldn't. Um, I drove the last 100 miles and the truck did not whine and the back seat did not whine and the radio worked and the air conditioner worked and the road was a normal road, and at 5 o'clock I pulled into a Holiday Inn Express in Albuquerque, and I lay down on the bed, and I slept for an hour and a half, and woke up better than I had been. I took Janelle and Tyler to a place called Frontier on Central Avenue, which had been our family place when we were still a family. Janelle was kind. Tyler was awkward, but he was there. We ate green chili cheeseburgers. Tyler told me about a girl in his class who had given a presentation about Edward Abbey in his AP English class, and how he had gotten a little choked up because that had been my favorite writer when he was a kid, and he had wanted to call me about it, but he hadn't known how. He apologized. I apologized for Christmas. I apologized for not calling. I told him about Bandit. He cried in the booth at Frontier with the fluorescents overhead and the busboys clearing tables behind us. He cried hard. I held his hand across the table, and Janelle put her hand on his shoulder, and the family we had been was at the table with us for about a minute, and then the minute was over. But the minute had been there. Janelle drove him home. I went back to the Holiday Inn. I lay on the bed. Around 11:30, the room phone rang. The room phone is the phone on the bedside table that nobody uses anymore. I sat up and looked at it. It rang 4 times. I picked it up. "Hello," I said. "Dad?" I sat up the rest of the way. "Tyler?" "Dad, come pick me up." His voice was thin. It was scared. "I'm at the gas station off Lomas. Mom and I had a fight. Please, just come." "Tyler, slow down." "What gas station off Lomas? Which one?" "The Phillips 66. The one near the freeway." "Why aren't you calling from your phone?" "My phone died. I'm using the phone here. Please come." I stood up. I was reaching for my keys. I stopped. I said, "Tyler, what did you order at Frontier tonight?" There was a pause. The voice on the line said, "Dad, what's going on? Just come get me. It's cold out here." I said, "Tyler, what did you order?" The voice on the line said, "Dad, I had the cheeseburger. Dad, come on." Tyler had had 2 cheeseburgers. He had ordered one. He had eaten it, and then he had ordered another one, because he was a growing kid and he had been hungry. The waiter had laughed about it. Janelle had teased him. The thing on the line knew about Frontier. The thing on the line did not know about the second cheeseburger. I said, "What's your sister's name?" "Tyler does not have a sister." The voice paused. The voice paused for a long second. The voice said, "Dad, please, my sister's name is Dad. Come on, I'm cold, I'm scared, please come." I hung up. I went to the door of the room. I checked the lock. I checked the chain. I closed the curtains. I sat in the chair by the window, and I waited. The chair was the kind of chair every hotel room has, a low armchair with a wooden frame and a cushion that had been sat in by 10,000 strangers. I sat in it with my back to the wall and a view of the door. I had the small folding knife from the camp open on the arm of the chair. I had my phone in my hand. The phone was at 27% battery. I plugged it in. I sat there for a long time. The clock on the bedside table was the small digital kind that ran a few minutes fast. The numbers on it changed and changed and changed. I watched them change. I watched 11:37 become 11:38 become 11:39. I watched midnight come on. I watched the first hour after midnight and the second. At about 1:15 I heard footsteps in the hall outside the room. They were unhurried footsteps. They walked from one end of the hall to the other and back. They paused outside my door. I do not know how long they paused. It might have been 10 seconds. It might have been a minute. I sat in the chair and I held the knife and I watched the door. And after a while the footsteps moved on, and I heard the door of another room open and close 3 doors down. and I heard the small ambient sounds of a man getting ready for bed in another room. A toilet, a television going on, low. The footsteps had been a man going to his room. That is what I told myself. I have stayed in enough hotels to know the sound of a man going to his room. I have also stayed in enough hotels to know that sometimes you cannot tell. The phone did not ring again that night. I called Janelle at 6 in the morning. I asked if Tyler was home. She said yes. Of course he was home. He was asleep. Did I know what time it was? I asked her, as casually as I could, whether he had been home all night. She said yes. She said he had gone to bed at 10:30 and she had checked on him at midnight when she went to bed herself because that is what mothers of teenage boys do, and he had been there in his bed with his earbuds in and the phone face down on his chest the way he always slept. I said okay. I said thank you. I said I had been worried about something stupid and I was sorry to wake her. She said it was fine. Was I all right? I said I was fine. I said I would see her on Friday. In the morning I drove to Janelle's house. I did not call. I parked across the street. I watched until Tyler came out for school at 6:55 with his backpack and his earbuds and got into the bus. He was fine. He was alive. He had not called me the night before. I drove home to my apartment in Albuquerque. I lay down on the couch. I slept for about 14 hours. When I woke up, it was getting dark again. The apartment was the way I had left it before the contract. The food bowl in the corner, the leash hanging on the hook by the door. A blanket folded on the end of the couch with white fur, worked into the weave that I had not been able to bring myself to wash out. I have not gone back into the field since. Whitehill called twice in the next 2 months to offer me other contracts. I declined them both. I have been working in the office, doing logs and consultancy, and the kind of work a geologist does when he is, for whatever reason, not willing to go out in the dust. The money is not as good. It is enough. I have rent. I pay child support. I drive down to see Tyler every other Friday. We are doing better. Janelle has not asked what changed me, and I have not told her. I do not know how I would tell her. I do not know what I would say. I have run the sentence in my head 100 times, and the sentence always comes out the same way, which is the way of a man who is no longer to be trusted, and I will not have Janelle look at me that way, even once. Even for the half second, it would take her to be polite about it. Some nights I hear Bandit at the door of the apartment. He whines, low, the way he used to. He scratches the door in the way he used to, scratch the door when he wanted to come in. I do not get up. I never get up. After a while, the whining stops. A month ago, I left a bowl of water out in the kitchen at night, the way I used to for Bandit, because I missed him and because something in me wanted to. The next morning, the water was gone. I do not know what drank it. I do not leave the water out anymore. Last week, when I was walking out to my truck in the parking lot at the apartment complex, I saw a dog about 100 yards off by the dumpster, a yellow lab mix, old, right rear leg favoring. He was watching me. He did not look like Bandit. The size was wrong. The coloring was wrong. But the gait, the way he was standing, that was the gait. I got in the truck and I drove to work. I do not look at the dumpster anymore. I park on the other side of the building now. The maintenance man asked me one time why I had switched spots, and I said it was because the morning light was bad on my windshield from the old spot, which was true, but not in the way he thought it was true. I do not know what came to the camp on the mesa. I do not know what called me at the Holiday Inn. I do not know what drank the water, but I know that on the night Bandit died on the drive up to Durango, he had been sitting in the passenger seat with his head on my leg, and I had been telling him, in a voice that was not steady, that he was a good boy, that he was a very good boy, that he was the best dog I had ever had. He had stopped breathing somewhere between Mancos and Hesperus. I had not stopped driving. I had thought, maybe if I just get him there fast enough. I had pulled into the vet's parking lot in Durango, with him already cold, with his head still on my leg, and the receptionist had come out, and she had been kind. I had paid the cremation fee. I had taken the ashes home in a small wooden box. The box is on a shelf in my apartment. It has not moved. It is exactly where I left it. But 3 nights ago, I went to the shelf to look at it because I was missing him, and the lid was cracked. The lid was cracked in a way that suggested it had been opened from the inside. I do not look at the shelf anymore. I leave the bowl empty. Story 4. The Ram's Horn. The day I went into the Ram's Horn to scatter my brother Pete, I was 62 years old and my knees were not what they had been, and I had been told by 3 different people that I should not be going in there alone. I went in anyway. I had been a firefighter in Phoenix for 31 years. I had been told a great many things in my life that I did not do by people who would not have done them themselves, and at 62 I had stopped pretending that telling counted for anything. The Ram's Horn is a slot canyon system on the Utah side of the Arizona line in a piece of country called the Bullhide Wilderness, which is a name I would not have given it, but which I did not name. The canyons run for about 8 miles back into the plateau, and at the head of them is a series of pour-offs and dry falls that, in the right weather and with the right rope, a man can rappel into and walk out of. My brother Pete and I had walked the Ram's Horn 40 years ago when we were in our 20s, and Pete had walked it again 3 years ago when he was 61, with a man named Dave Pakes, who Pete had known since high school. Pete had fallen 40 feet at the second pour-off and broken his back and bled out before Dave could get a helicopter in. I had not been there when it happened. I had been in Phoenix, asleep in my bed with my wife Carol, who had woken up around 4 a.m. the way she did sometimes and put her hand on my chest. She had said later that she had not known why. The phone call came at 5:30 the next morning. Dave had been at the trailhead in Pete's truck, having walked out the 8 miles in the dark with a headlamp, having left my brother's body in the slot because there was nothing else to do. The ashes had been with me for 3 years. I had been meaning to take them to the Ram's Horn for 3 years. There had been a thing in me about it. I had told Carol that I would do it after we got the kitchen redone, and then after my hip surgery, and then after my granddaughter's wedding. Carol, who was not stupid, had stopped pressing me about it. She had said one night in the kitchen, with her hand on the box, "Hank, you don't have to do it if you can't." I had said, "I can. I just need to wait for the right time." She had said, "Hanko, the right time is whenever you go." She had used the name Pete had used for me when we were boys, when he was older and I was the small one trying to keep up. I had not heard the name said out loud in 3 years. I had cried in the kitchen with my wife in the box of ashes, and I had said I would do it in May. The thing I had not told Carol, and that I had not told anyone, was that I had not gone because I had been afraid to go. I had not been afraid of the canyon. I knew the canyon. I had been afraid that I would get to the pour-off and look down at it and not feel anything. I had been afraid that the 3 years would have done their work on me, the way 3 years does its work on a man, and that I would stand at the spot where my brother had bled out and feel only the kind of dull sad that I had been feeling about Pete for most of those 3 years, and that the dullness would be the final thing, and that I would have to carry it home and live the rest of my life with the knowledge that I had stood at my brother's death spot and felt the kind of nothing that men who have stopped feeling things feel. I had been afraid of being that man. I had not been afraid of the canyon. The canyon had never been the thing I was afraid of. May was when I went. I packed the truck on a Saturday morning in the carport. Carol came out with a thermos of coffee and a sandwich for the road. She did not say anything. She put the thermos on the passenger seat. She put the sandwich on top of the thermos. She kissed me on the side of the face, and she went back inside without watching me pull out. I drove up from Phoenix in my F-150. It is a 2017 with 180,000 miles on it, and it pulls a small pop-up camper that Carol and I had bought in 1992 and that I had kept running by feel and stubbornness. I had not brought the pop-up. I had brought a tent. I wanted to do it on the ground the way Pete and I had done it in 1986. I had a Kelty tent that was 20 years old and a sleeping bag that was about the same and a backpack with the kind of gear a man brings when he has been packing it for 40 years and does not need to think about it. I had a small leather drawstring bag with my brother's ashes inside it. Pete had been cremated, and the funeral home had given Lana, his widow, a small wooden urn, and Lana had given me a portion of the ashes in a plastic bag, and I had transferred the bag to the leather pouch the night before I left, because I did not want to carry a plastic bag into the Ram's Horn and have it tear. The drive took 2 days. I overnighted at a Motel 6 in Page. I ate dinner at a Denny's. I had a chicken fried steak. That was the kind of chicken fried steak you get at a Denny's at 6 in the evening on a Monday in May, which is to say it was all right. And I drank a Coors Light from the bottle, and I watched the dining room without really watching it. There was a family in the booth across from me, 2 parents and 3 kids, and the kids were doing the kid things that kids do, and the parents were doing the parent things. And I watched them for a while and thought about my own kids who were grown now and had kids of their own, and about how the kid things and the parent things never really changed, just who was doing them. I called Carol before bed. She said, "You doing okay?" I said, Yeah, I'm doing okay." She said, "Don't try to do it all in one day." I said I would not. She said, "Hank." I said, "What?" She said, "Come home." I said I would. I got to the Ramshorn trailhead the next afternoon. It was a Tuesday in the first week of May. The Dirt Road Inn had been graded recently, and the parking area had 2 other vehicles in it, an old Subaru with Utah plates and a rental SUV with Arizona plates. There was a small BLM sign that said the canyon was open and that no permits were required and that visitors were responsible for their own safety. I read the sign. I had read it before. I signed the log on the kiosk. I noted my entry and my expected exit, which I gave. As 3 days out, I shouldered the pack. A man came out of the Subaru as I was putting the pack on. He was about my age, in a flannel shirt and a battered straw hat, and he had a small camera on a strap around his neck. He had been waiting, I realized, for someone to talk to. The look on his face was the look of a man who had been alone in a parking lot for an hour and wanted to be alone for one less. He said, "You headed in?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Solo?" I said, "Yeah." He looked at me. He said, "Long day in there. You been before?" I said, 40 years ago. He said, He let it sit. He said, "I came out yesterday, 2 days. Nice canyon. Watched the second pour off. There's a story about that pour off." I said, "I know the story." He looked at me again. Something moved in his face and settled. He said, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said anything." I said, "It's all right. It was a long time ago." He said, "Take care in there." He nodded. He got in the Subaru. He drove out. I watched the dust of his car for a while. Then I shouldered the pack and I walked. The walk-in was 8 miles. The first 5 were on a flat sandy track through pinyon and juniper, the kind of country that smelled like the country Pete and I had grown up in, west of Cedar City, where our father had run a small construction outfit and we had spent every summer Saturday loading rebar in the back of a pickup. The smell of the country had not changed in 50 years. The smell of the country was, in some senses, the only thing in my life that had not changed. I walked it, and I thought about Pete, and I thought about the time he had cut his foot on a piece of culvert in 1972, and I had walked the 2 miles back to the truck to get our father because Pete had been too proud to do it himself. I thought about how he had hated his name for a while in junior high and made everyone call him PJ. I thought about how he had called me Hanko on his deathbed of the only kind of death I had been able to picture, which was the slow kind that gave a man time to use his name. Pete had not been a slow kind of death. Pete had been alive at 6:40 in the morning, eating a granola bar at the top of the second pour-off and lacing his boots. And at 6:47 Pete had been dead in a plunge pool with his back broken and his lungs filling, and Dave Pakes standing at the top of the rope with the radio in his hand, calling for a helicopter that would not get there in time. The whole window had been 7 minutes. I had thought about the 7 minutes a great deal. I had thought about how my brother had spent his last 7 minutes alive on the planet. I had thought about whether he had known. I had thought about whether Dave had told him the truth the way I would have, or had lied to him gently the way some men would have. I had asked Dave once. Dave had said, "I told him you were on your way." He had said this in our kitchen, with Carol pouring him a coffee, with the morning sun coming in through the window over the sink. I had not been on my way. I had been asleep in Phoenix 400 miles away. Dave had lied to him. Dave had said the lie a brother would have said, and I had loved Dave for it for the rest of his life, which was another year and 4 months. Until Dave had died of the colon cancer, he had not told anyone he had. The last 3 miles took the trail into the canyon. The walls came up around me. The trail dropped down through a series of narrow steps. The air got cooler. The light got colored the way it gets in slot country, the orange of the sandstone walls reflecting off the air itself. I made camp at a wide spot in the canyon where the water in spring would run, but where in May the bed was dry. I had remembered the spot. Pete and I had camped there in 1986. I set up the tent on the same patch of sand. I built a small fire ring with the same rocks. Some of the rocks I lifted were rocks I might have lifted 40 years before. There is no way to know. I made coffee. I ate a sandwich I had brought from the gas station in Page. I sat by the fire ring without lighting it, because the wind off the rim was steady and I did not want to risk it. The light started to go. That was when I saw the deer. It came down the canyon from upstream, in the dimming light, walking the way deer walk in canyon country, with the small, careful steps and the lift of the head every few yards to scent the air. It was a mule deer doe. I have seen 10,000 mule deer in my life. I know the shape of them. I know the way they move. I knew, before I knew, that there was something wrong with the way this one moved. I watched it. It came down the wash to about 30 yards from the camp. It stopped. It lifted its head. It looked at me. I looked at it. I want to be careful about what I say next. The deer had legs. The deer had 4 legs. The deer had 4 legs that were where the legs were supposed to be. But when it walked, there was a sound, a small extra sound, like one more hoof clicking on the sandstone every step. Not a doubled sound, not an echo, a sound like a 5th hoof landing a beat behind the 4. I listened to it walk, and I counted the hoof falls, and they did not add up. 4 legs and 5 sounds, then 4 legs and 4 sounds, then 4 legs and 5 sounds again. The 5th sound came from somewhere behind the deer, from between the deer's hind legs, from under it. I stood up. The deer looked at me. It looked at me the way a deer does not look. A deer does not stare. A deer's eyes go to a man and away from a man and back, the way a prey animal's eyes go. This deer's eyes did not go anywhere. The deer's eyes were on me. The deer's eyes were on me the way a man's eyes are on you when he has come to your door at night and has not yet said what he wants. I clapped my hands. A deer flushes from clapped hands. This deer did not flush. The deer took 2 steps closer. The 5th hoof landed each time. I picked up a rock from the fire ring. I threw it. The rock hit the sand about 3 feet short of the deer. The deer did not react. The deer took another step. Now I could see it better. The eyes were the wrong color. They were not the brown of a mule deer's eyes. They were a yellow color that I've seen before in the eyes of a coyote, but the eyes were not a coyote's either. They were too large for a coyote. They were too forward set. The eyes were the eyes of a thing that was looking at me, that wanted to be looked back at. I picked up a bigger rock. I threw it harder. The rock hit the deer in the shoulder. The deer made a sound. It was not a sound a deer makes. It was a sound like a man clearing his throat. Then the deer turned and walked back up the wash, slowly, the way it had come, with the 5 hoof falls per step, and went around a bend, and was gone. I stood there for a while with another rock in my hand. I waited for it to come back. I waited for the canyon to come back to itself. The light was dropping. The walls were going from orange to a darker color. The deer did not come back. The wash was empty. I went over to where the deer had stood. I had been a firefighter for 31 years, and before that I had been a soldier in Germany for 2. And before that I had been a boy who hunted with his father, and I had walked enough ground in my life to know how to read it. I knelt down on the sandstone slab where the deer had stood. There were tracks. The tracks were mule deer tracks. They were the correct depth and the correct splay for a mule deer of that size. But where the front hooves had set, there were also marks behind the front hooves. The marks were the marks of fingers, of a hand the size of a man's hand, pressed flat into the sandstone where sandstone is too hard to take a print. I looked at the marks for about a minute. Then I stood up and I walked back to the tent, and I did not look at the marks again. I sat back down. I had been firefighting for 31 years. I had been the captain of a Phoenix engine company for the last 14 of those years. I had stood in front of houses on fire, and I had pulled bodies out of car wrecks, and I had gone into a meth lab once where a man with a knife had come around a corner at me, and I had hit him with a Halligan tool in the dark. I had been afraid in my life. I knew the shape of being afraid. What I had just felt was not that. What I had just felt was the thing under being afraid, the thing under the fear that the fear is built on top of to protect you, the thing the fear is a roof for. I did not light the fire. I did not eat. I sat for a long time, and I looked at the rim of the canyon, and I waited for the dark. Around full dark, I went into the tent. I zipped it closed. I put my headlamp on its lowest setting, and I sat cross-legged on the sleeping bag, and I tried to think. The deer was not a deer. I knew that. I knew the names for what the deer was. I had grown up in southern Utah, where you do not grow up without hearing the words. I had been taught not to say the words, because the words are not mine to say. I am a white man from a town near a reservation, not from the reservation, and the things I had heard about as a kid had come from kids whose parents were Dene, and I had been told even then that we were not to repeat the words. I will not repeat them now. I will say only this. There are things in that country that are not deer. I sat in the tent. The first thing I heard was footsteps in the wash. Not deer steps, boot steps. A man walking up the wash from downstream, the direction I had come from. The steps came up to about 10 feet from the tent. They stopped. A voice said, "Hanko." I did not say anything. The voice said, "Hanko, you came." The voice was Pete's voice. I do not mean it sounded like Pete's voice. I mean it was Pete's voice. The exact pitch. The little catch in it from the cigarette habit Pete had picked up in Vietnam and never put down. The way the O in Hanko trailed up at the end, the way Pete's voice always trailed up, because Pete had picked up some Texan from a girlfriend in his late 20s and never lost it. I sat in the tent. I did not move. The voice said, "Hanko, come out. I've been waiting for you. I've been waiting for you a long time." I closed my eyes. The voice said, "I've been cold, Hanko. It's cold down here." The voice was right outside the tent. I had not lit the fire. I made a decision. I unzipped the tent. I came out with the headlamp on full. I came out with the small folding shovel I had brought to dig a hole for the ashes. I came out to fight if I needed to fight, because I was 62 and I had been a fireman for 31 years, and I was not going to be talked to in my brother's voice in the dark. There was no one there. The wash was empty. The headlamp threw a cone of white across the sand for about 30 feet. There were no boot prints. There were no man marks. The wash was the wash. I stood in the cone of light, and I said out loud to whatever was in the dark, the only thing I had to say, "You're not him. You're not Pete. Pete's dead. He died down here 3 years ago, and he is not coming back, and you can use his voice all you want, and you can know his nickname for me, and you can be cold, and you can be sorry, and I do not care. You are not him." I waited. The wash did not say anything back. The canyon did not say anything back. The wind moved a piece of brush 100 yards up the wash. A coyote called once, far off, in the dark beyond the rim. A real coyote. I knew the difference now, too. I went back into the tent. I did not sleep. I did not try. I sat up against the back wall of the tent with my knees drawn up and the small folding shovel across my lap, and I watched the tent fabric. The fabric is a thin nylon. The headlamp on the dimmest setting made the inside of the tent the color of weak tea. I could see the shape of the fly above me where the wind moved it. I could see the small shadows of insects on the outside of the fabric. I could not see anything beyond the fabric, but I could hear, and I listened. A few times in the night I thought I heard the footsteps come back. They would walk up the wash and stop and walk away, and I would not hear them turn around, only the steps going, and never the moment of turn. Twice I heard the voice say something I could not make out. Once I heard, very distinctly, my own name. Not Hanko, just Hank, the way Carol said it. The way it had said it on the porch later, although I did not know yet that there would be a later. I did not answer. Around 4 a.m, I heard a coyote pack going off about a mile to the north. The pack call is the sound of coyotes being coyotes, the yipping and the laughing and the long, low howls underneath. And the sound was so clearly the sound of real animals doing what real animals do that I cried a little in the tent. It was the cleanest sound I had heard in a long time. It was a sound that belonged to a real world. I lay down then. I did not sleep, but I lay down. I held the shovel. I watched the dawn come up the wash and turn the fabric of the tent from black to gray to the first faint orange of canyon light coming through nylon. In the morning I lit the fire. I made coffee. I sat by the fire with the leather pouch in my lap. The ram's horn at dawn is one of the more beautiful places in the world. The light comes down the walls and turns them every color sandstone can be, from the deep red at the base where the iron is to the pale, almost white at the top where the sun hits first. The light came down. I watched it come. I drank my coffee, and I ate a granola bar, and I packed the tent, and I walked the last half-mile of the canyon to the second pour-off, which is where Pete had fallen. I had not been to the spot. I had not let myself go to the spot, even on the maps, even in my head. I knew the spot was at the second pour-off because Dave had told me. I knew what it looked like because Dave had described it. I went, and I looked. The pour-off was a 40-foot drop into a plunge pool that was, in May, only about a foot deep. There were bolts at the top from where Dave had rigged his rope. The bolts were still in the rock. They were rusted now. I touched one of them with my fingers. It was warm from the morning sun. I stood there for a while. I looked down into the pool. There were minnows in it. The small canyon minnows that live in the standing pools through the dry months. And they were going about their minnow business at the bottom of the pool the way they had been the morning Pete had died. 3 years ago they would not have been the same minnows. But they would have been minnows like them. In a pool like this one, doing what they were doing the morning my brother had hit the rock and bled out and looked up at his last sky. I thought about that for a while. I thought about how my brother's last view had been the rim of the ram's horn from the bottom of a pour-off in May, with the light coming down the walls. I thought about what a man thinks about, and the time he has between hitting and going, and I thought how I would never know, and I thought how that was all right. Pete was a man who had liked the country and who had died in the country. There was a version of his death that I could live with, and that was that version. I picked the version. I let it be the version. The other versions, the bad ones, I left in the pool with the minnows and I did not look at them. I took the leather pouch out of my pack. I opened it. I tipped it over the pour-off. The ashes came out in a stream and they fell. And most of them fell all the way to the bottom, and some of them caught on the wind and went sideways into the canyon. I watched them fall. I said, Pete, this is where you are. This is where I came to put you. I love you. I love you, brother. I'm sorry I waited. The ashes fell. I stood at the lip of the pour-off and I cried for a while, the way an old man cries, with no theater to it, just water coming out of my face. When I was done, I closed the leather pouch and I put it back in the pack and I turned around and I walked the 8 miles out. About a mile from the trailhead, I heard footsteps behind me on the trail. I did not turn around. I walked another quarter mile. The footsteps kept pace. I did not turn around. I walked another quarter mile. The footsteps kept pace. I came to a place where the trail bent around a juniper, and I stopped. I waited. The footsteps stopped. I said, "Go back." The footsteps did not move. I said, "I told you. You're not him. Go back." There was a long silence on the trail. The wind was doing the thing it does in juniper country, the small dry rustle in the needles, the small sound of nothing happening. The voice said, "Very quiet, Hanko." I said, "Go back." The voice said, "Hanko, please." I said, "No." The voice said, "Hanko, I'm cold. I've been cold 3 years." I closed my eyes. I stood on the trail with my eyes closed, and I felt the sun on my face, and I felt the weight of the pack, and I felt the small, dry wind in the junipers, and I let myself feel, for a long second, the full pull of what the thing on the trail was offering. To turn around, to say his name, to go back to the canyon and sit down at the second pour-off with my brother who was cold and who was sorry and who wanted me to come and sit with him. I felt the pull. The pull was strong. The pull was the strongest thing I had felt in 3 years. It was, I realized standing there, the exact pull of what grief is, when grief is most of what a man has, and someone offers to take it from him. I opened my eyes. I said, "Pete is gone. You are not Pete." Pete loved his brother and would not ask his brother to come down in a hole and be cold with him. Pete would tell his brother to go home to his wife. Pete would tell his brother to live the rest of the time he had. That is what Pete would say. You are not him. The voice did not answer. I walked the rest of the way to the trailhead without looking back. I did not hear the footsteps follow. I do not know if they followed without me hearing or if they stopped. I got to the truck. I put the pack in the bed. I got in the cab. I started the engine. I drove out the 8 miles of dirt road to the state highway, and I drove the state highway to the interstate, and I drove the interstate south. I did not stop for 200 miles. I called Carol from a McDonald's parking lot outside Flagstaff. I said, "I did it." She said, "Okay." She said, "Are you all right?" I said, "I don't know." She said, "Come home." I said I was coming. I said I would be there by 10. I got home at 10:40. Carol was on the porch with the wind chimes she had put up the spring before, which made the small sound they make when the air is right. She had a cup of tea in her hand. She had been waiting. She did not ask me about the ashes. She did not ask me about the canyon. She put down the tea and she came down off the porch and she hugged me and I hugged her back and we stood in the driveway like that for a while. And she did not ask anything that night. She made me a grilled cheese sandwich and a glass of milk like I was a boy home from a long day, and I ate the sandwich at the kitchen table while she sat across from me and looked at me. I ate the sandwich slowly. Carol does not look at a man with questions in her face. Carol looks at a man the way a person looks at a thing they have known for 44 years and decided to keep. She let me eat. When I was done, she took the plate and washed it and put it away, and she said, "Bed." And we went to bed, and I slept for 9 hours, which I had not done in 3 years. That was 3 weeks ago. The first week home I slept poorly. I had dreams about the wash, about the deer, about Pete's voice on the other side of the tent fabric. I did not tell Carol about the dreams. I did not tell Carol about Pete's voice. I did not tell Carol anything that I would not have been able to say to her at the kitchen table in good light, and there was nothing about the ram's horn that I could say at the kitchen table in good light. The second week home I slept better. The third week home I slept normally. But last Thursday I came out on the porch around dusk to bring in the wind chimes, because there was a storm coming in from the west and the chimes get noisy in a real wind. I had been on the porch for about a minute. I had unhooked the first chime. I was reaching for the second. I heard, from the yard beyond the porch, in the soft gloom of evening, a laugh. It was Pete's laugh. The exact laugh. The little wheeze on the end where his old cigarette lungs would not let him laugh all the way out. I did not turn around. I did not move. I held the wind chime in my hand, and I stood very still on my own porch in my own town in Phoenix, Arizona, and I waited. The laugh did not come again. The wind came up. The other chime moved on its hook. I unhooked it. I went inside. I closed the door. I locked it. I locked the chain. I went into the kitchen where Carol was making dinner. She said, "You all right?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You bring in the chimes." I said, "Yeah, I got 'em." She said, "Good. Storm's coming." I sat down at the kitchen table. She put a plate in front of me. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans from the garden. We ate. We watched a little television. We went to bed. I have not gone out on the porch after dark since. I have done other things. I have watered the yard at 5 in the afternoon when there is still good light. I have taken in the mail before the sun gets behind the houses across the street. I have stopped putting the trash out at night. The trash now goes out in the morning, before work, when I can see the alley and when the alley can see me. Carol has noticed. Carol notices everything. She has not said anything about it. She has done her own version of the same thing. She has, over the last 2 weeks, quietly put a small lamp on the porch with a dusk sensor so that the porch lights up when the sun goes down. She has, over the last 2 weeks, quietly hung a second wind chime which is larger than the first so that the porch makes a louder sound in any wind. She has, over the last 2 weeks, quietly bought a motion sensor floodlight from the Home Depot and put it on the side of the house facing the gravel. We have not talked about why. We are not going to talk about why. We have been married for 44 years and we know when not to talk. Last night I stood at the window and I looked out at the yard for a long time. The yard was empty. The street light was on. The lawn was the lawn I had mowed 2 days ago. There was nothing in the yard. But there was a place at the edge of the yard where the lawn meets the gravel that runs along the side of the house, where the gravel had been disturbed, like something had stood there. Like something had stood there for a while. It might have been a deer. We get deer through the neighborhood sometimes. It probably was a deer. I have not gone out to look at the gravel. I am not going to. Story 5, Cold Creek Junction. Mike Sandoval and I had been doing the same trip every May for 15 years, and we had a system. The system was, you didn't say anything until you got to Payson. You drove the 2.5 hours from Flagstaff in your own truck, and the other guy drove from wherever he was driving from, and you met in the parking lot of the Bosch's grocery store on Highway 87, and you didn't talk about anything until you had bought what you were going to buy. The buying was its own ritual. Hot dogs, buns, a pound of bacon, 2 pounds of ground chuck for chili, a can of Hormel chili to pour over the ground chuck because Mike believed, and I had come around to believing, that the Hormel made chili made by men in the woods taste more like chili coffee. Half and half for Mike, who could not drink black coffee no matter how many times I told him he was a child. A 12-pack of Coors Banquet in the bottles, never the cans. A box of Strike Anywhere matches even though we both carried lighters, because Mike's father had taught him to bring matches, and I had stopped fighting him about it in 2014. 2 bags of Doritos, 1 nacho cheese, and 1 Cool Ranch, because we could not settle the argument and had stopped trying. I am Joe Ahern. I am 44. I am an electrician, and I run my own shop, Ahern Electric, out of a small unit in an industrial park on the east side of Flagstaff. I have 3 employees and a wife named Teresa, and a daughter named Bryn, who is 12, and a son named Mason, who is 9. And I had been doing this trip with Mike Sandoval since 2011, when Mike and I had been 28 and 29, and Mike's oldest was still a baby, and I had not yet had one. Mike was a high school shop teacher in Cottonwood. He had 3 boys and a wife named Erin, who was a nurse, and a dog named Tickle, who was named that for a reason I never understood. Mike was my best friend. I want to be clear about that, because the rest of what I am going to tell you only makes sense if you understand that Mike was my best friend, the kind of best friend a grown man does not usually have, the kind he had at 15 and lost touch with at 25, the kind you do not get back. Mike and I had stayed best friends because we had decided to stay best friends. And we had decided to stay best friends because we had liked each other from the day we met, and we were not going to let the world take that away from us. The May trip was part of how we did it every year. No exceptions. Aaron and Teresa understood. The kids understood. It was a thing. Mike and I had met on a job site in 2007. I was running wire for a custom home in West Sedona. Mike had been hired by the contractor to do some of the built-in cabinetry, which Mike had done on the side back then before he had gone full-time into teaching. We had been working in the same unfinished kitchen one afternoon, and Mike had said something about the country music the Framers were playing on the radio, and I had said something about it back, and we had spent the next 2 hours not working but talking. And the contractor had come in and yelled at us, and Mike had said, "Yes, sir," in the way that gets a contractor to laugh. And the contractor had laughed, and that had been the start of it. We had known each other for 19 years. We had been in each other's weddings. We had held each other's babies on the day they were born. We had been at each other's parents' funerals. We had been at each other's parents' second funerals when the other one died too. The friendship had been a thing in my life that I had not had to think about because it had been there. It had been the kind of thing in a man's life that lets him take other things for granted. The trip was always to the same place, a spot called Cold Creek Junction in the Mogollon Rim country east of Payson, where two small creeks come together in a meadow under a stand of ponderosa pines, and where there is a flat piece of ground that has, for as long as either of us had been going, an old fire ring with rocks the size of soccer balls arranged in a circle on the bare dirt. There was no campground there. There were no facilities. There was the meadow and the creeks and the trees and the fire ring, and that was all there was. You drove a forest road off Highway 260 for about 4 miles, and you parked at the end of it, and you walked half a mile in on a trail that was not really a trail. That was more like a deer track that had been widened by feet. Cold Creek Junction was on no map I had ever seen. Mike had been brought there by his uncle when he was 14. He had brought me there in May 2011. We had been going since. This year the trip was the first weekend of May. The weather was right. The high country had cleared of the last of the snow, and the creeks were running but not rolling, and the bugs were not out yet. I drove down from Flagstaff in my F-250 on a Friday afternoon after I had finished a panel upgrade on a house in Belmont, and I met Mike in the Bash's parking lot at 4:30. He was leaning in his Tacoma drinking a bottled water. He grinned when he saw my truck. I grinned back. We hugged in the parking lot the way we hugged every year, the backslapping hug men use to disguise the fact that they are hugging. He said, "You look like shit." I said, "You look worse." He said, "Yeah, but..." I started further back. We went inside. The buying took half an hour. We went to the cash register with our usual cart. The cashier was a woman named Patty who had been at the Bosch's as long as we had been doing the trip and who recognized us. She said, "Boys, it's that time." Mike said, "It's that time, Patty." She rang us up. The total was $94.27. Mike paid. Mike had paid for the first trip in 2011, and we had decided in 2012 that he would always pay for the buying because of how the math worked out on whose turn it was, and we had never revisited the decision. We drove the two trucks east on Highway 260 for an hour. We took the forest road south at the place where the highway bends around a hill and the road peels off at a small sign you would miss if you did not know it was there. The forest road was 4 miles of washboard, and we drove it in convoy with our windows down. I had Springsteen on the radio. Mike had whatever Mike was listening to, which I never knew because Mike's truck radio did not work, and Mike played his music on a Bluetooth speaker he zip-tied to the passenger headrest. We parked at the end of the forest road. We unloaded. We walked the half mile in. The meadow was the way the meadow had been every May for 15 years. The fire ring was the way the fire ring had been. The creek was running clean, and the pines were doing what pines do, which is be very tall and smell like pines. Mike said, "Smell that." I said, "I am smelling that." He said, "That is the smell of being alive." I said, "That is the smell of you needing to take a shower." He laughed. He said, "Joe Ahern, you have always been a hateful man." We set up camp. We pitched our 2 tents. Mike had a big Agnes that was older than his oldest kid, and I had a Mountain Hardware that I had bought new in 2019, about 10 feet apart at the edge of the meadow. We laid out the cooler and the camp chairs. We got the fire ring cleaned out, and we collected wood from the deadfall around the meadow, which was the kind of dry pine that takes a match and goes. We built a fire by about 6:30. The sun was still up. The light was the long high country May light that makes the meadow look like a painting of a meadow. We cooked the burgers on the cast iron skillet Mike had brought, which he had brought every year, which had blackened to the color of asphalt over 15 years of trips. We ate the burgers with the Hormel chili on top, which is the way we always ate them, and we drank the Coors Banquets out of the bottles, and we talked about everything. We talked about Mike's middle son, who had started talking about getting his learner's permit next year and was scaring Mike. We talked about my daughter Bryn, who was 12, who had told Teresa the week before that she might be gay, which had been the kind of conversation Teresa and I had not prepared ourselves for, and which we had. I thought, handled okay. Mike said it sounded like we had handled it okay. Mike said his oldest had come out as bi when he was 16, and they had done the same thing we had done, which was say, okay, and we love you, and let's order pizza. And we agreed that this was the right way to handle it because there was no other right way, and we agreed that the kids were better at this than we had been at their age. We talked about my business, which was doing well. We talked about Mike's school district, which was not. We talked about Erin's bid for charge nurse, which she had been working toward. We talked about the World Series. Mike told a story about the time we had taken a kayak trip on the Verde River in 2014, and he had flipped the kayak about 100 yards from the put-in, and he had told the story about it about 50 times in 15 years, and I had laughed at it every time. I told the story about Mike's bachelor party, which Erin had been generous enough to allow to be a real bachelor party, and which Mike had handled with the dignity of a man who knew that whatever he did that night was going to be told about for the rest of his life. We talked about high school. We talked about the time on our second year doing the trip that we had gotten so drunk we had argued about whether the moon went around the earth or the earth around the moon, and we had decided in the end that this was a stupid argument because we both knew the answer, and the real argument was whether either of us could remember any of our high school physics, and neither of us could, and we had toasted to the failure of the American educational system. Mike said the toast again now. To the failure of the American educational system, he said, and clinked his banquet against mine. I said, and to the survival of the American electrician. He said, hear, hear. We drank. We drank steadily, but not heavily. We were 44 and 43, and we had learned, over the years, to drink the way men of 44 and 43 drink, which is to say, enough to feel it and not enough to ruin the morning. Around 10:30, Mike went off into the trees on the far side of the meadow to take a piss. He took his headlamp. I was sitting by the fire when he went. I watched the headlamp move across the meadow and into the trees and disappear. I poked at the fire with a stick. I opened another beer. I waited. He did not come back. I waited some more. The fire crackled. A bat went over the meadow, the small, dipping flight of a bat at full dark. I checked my watch. It had been 8 minutes since Mike had walked off. Mike could take a piss in 2 minutes flat. Mike was not a man who took 8 minutes for anything. I called out. I said, "Hey, you all right?" The meadow did not answer. I stood up. I got my own headlamp. I clipped it to my hat. I walked across the meadow in the direction Mike had gone. I called his name. He did not answer. I called it again. The meadow took my voice and gave nothing back. I got to the edge of the trees. I stood for a minute, and I shone the headlamp around. I saw the trunks. I saw the dead fall. I did not see Mike. I called his name a third time and a fourth. A voice, off in the trees, about 40 yards in, said, "Joe?" I said, "Mike, what the hell? Where are you?" The voice said, "Joe, I'm over here. Come over here." The voice was Mike's voice. The cadence was Mike's cadence. The pitch was Mike's pitch. But there was something I noticed in the way the voice said Joe, a small flatness in the O that I had not noticed before. In 15 years of hearing Mike say my name, it was a small thing. I noticed it. I said, "Are you hurt?" The voice said, "Joe, I'm over here. Come over here." The exact same words, the exact same intonation, the exact same flatness in the O. I did not move. I said, "Mike, where are you? Talk to me." The voice said, "Joe, I'm over here. Come over here." I stood at the edge of the meadow with the headlamp shining into the trees and the small flat voice repeating its 3 sentences, and I felt the kind of cold come up my spine that I have read about in books and never felt myself. The kind that starts at the small of the back and walks up vertebra by vertebra to the base of the skull. I backed up. I backed up out of the trees, into the meadow, with the headlamp still pointed into the trees, and I did not turn around until I was back at the fire ring. And when I turned around to put more wood on the fire, I was shaking. I sat down. I put my hands on my knees to stop them from shaking. I tried to think. Mike walked into the firelight from behind me about a minute later, from the opposite side of the meadow, from the direction of the trucks, not the direction he had walked off in. He said, "Hey, I had to go further than I thought. I saw a deer over by the trucks and I followed it for a minute." I looked at him. He looked at me. He said, What's wrong?" I said, "Were you just calling me from the woods over there?" I pointed across the meadow. Mike said, "No, I was over by the trucks. I just told you that." His voice was Mike's voice. The cadence was Mike's cadence. The O in no was Mike's O. The flatness was not there. I said, "Mike, honest to God, were you just calling my name from the trees on that side of the meadow?" Mike said, "Joe." "No, I was on the other side of the meadow. I was looking at the deer. What's going on?" I told him. I told him about the voice. I told him about the 3 sentences. I told him about the flatness in the O. Mike's face changed. I had known Mike since 2011. I had seen Mike's face in every weather. I had seen Mike laugh, and I had seen Mike furious. And I had seen Mike at his father's funeral and at the birth of his youngest. And I had never seen the look that came over Mike's face when I told him about the voice. It was a look that was not for me. It was a look that was for something he was remembering. It was a look that said the something he was remembering was something he had not let himself remember in a long time. He said, "Very quiet, Joe. We need to leave." I said, "What?" He said, "Joe, right now, pack up." I said, "Mike, it's 11 o'clock at night." He said, "Joe, pack the trucks. We can be on 260 in an hour." I said, "Mike, what the hell?" He said, "Joe, please." The way he said please was not a Mike word. Mike was not a man who said please. Mike was a man who used please the way you would use a hammer, which is to say only when something needed hammering, and the something tonight that needed hammering was me, and Mike was hammering me, and I started packing. We packed in the dark. We struck the tents. We threw the gear in the trucks. We did not bother with the cooler. We left the cooler at the meadow, full of beer, with the lid open. Mike said, "Leave it." Mike said, "Let it have the beer." I did not ask Mike who it was. We were walking out the half mile to the trucks at 11:30. The voice came from the trees once, off to our left, when we were about 300 yards from the trucks. It said, "Mike, Mike, come back, you forgot the chili." Mike did not look at the trees. Mike did not break stride. Mike said, very quiet between his teeth, "Don't answer. Don't look." I did not answer. I did not look. The voice did not come again. We got to the trucks. We got in. Mike led the way out the forest road. I followed. The forest road was a tunnel of pine in the headlights, and the washboard was loud, and I kept my eyes on Mike's taillights, and I did not look in the rearview mirror, although the urge to look in the rearview mirror was, the whole way out, the strongest urge I have ever fought in my life. We came out at Highway 260. Mike pulled off into the dirt turnout at the intersection. He got out of his truck. I got out of mine. We stood in the wash of his headlights. He was shaking. His hands were shaking. I had never seen Mike's hands shake. I said, "Mike, what was that?" Mike said, "Joe." He said, "Joe, I'm going to tell you something. My uncle, who brought me to that meadow when I was 14, he told me there were 2 rules. He said, you do not stay past midnight on the new moon. And he said, if a voice ever calls you from the trees and uses your name, you walk out and you do not answer and you do not look back." I said, "Mike, you never told me this." Mike said, "I never told anybody. I never thought I would have to." I said, "Was tonight the new moon?" Mike said, "Tonight is the new moon." We stood for a while in the headlights. Mike said, "Joe, I'm going to drive home. I'm going to call Erin and tell her I'm coming home. I want you to drive home too. I want you to call Teresa. I want you to go straight home. Do not stop." I said, "Mike." Mike said, "Don't stop." I said, "Okay." He hugged me. He held on for a longer time than the back-slapping hug. He let go. He got in the Tacoma. He drove west on 260. I got in the F-250. I drove west on 260. Mike got further ahead of me. After a while, I could not see his taillights. I drove home. I called Teresa from a gas station outside Camp Verde. I told her I was on my way home. She said, "What's going on, Joe?" I said, "I'll tell you when I get there." She said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I'm fine. Mike's fine. We just decided to come home." She said, "Joe." I said, "I'll be home in 2 hours." I drove. The road from Camp Verde up the mountain to Flagstaff is one I have driven 1,000 times. It runs through pine, and then through high desert, and then through pine again as you climb. I drove it that night with the radio off because I did not want any voices in the truck. I drove it with the windows up because I did not want any sound from outside. I drove it with my hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel because that was the only thing I could think to do with my hands. About halfway up the mountain, near the spot where the road bends past a small turnout that has a historical marker about an old stage stop, I thought I saw, in the rearview mirror, headlights behind me that were too close. I looked again. There were no headlights. The road behind me was dark. I checked the mirror 6 times in the next minute. The road stayed dark. I told myself I had imagined it. I knew I had not. I kept driving. I got home at 2 in the morning. Teresa was in the kitchen with a cup of tea. She did not say anything. She let me put my bag down. She let me wash my face. She let me come into the kitchen and sit at the table. She put the tea in front of me. I drank it. I did not tell her what had happened at the meadow. I told her some of it. I told her enough that she would understand that I had not come home because Mike and I had had a fight. I did not tell her about the voice. I did not tell her about the 3 sentences. I slept in our bed with her arm around me. I slept badly. I dreamed about the meadow. The next morning, at 8, my phone rang. It was Erin, Mike's wife. She was not crying. She was past crying. She had been past crying for 3 hours. She had been past crying since the Arizona Department of Public Safety had come to her door at 5 in the morning to tell her that Mike's Tacoma had been found at a rest stop off Highway 260 outside Strawberry, with Mike in the driver's seat, and Mike had been dead for some hours. The medical examiner would later rule it a heart attack. Mike had been 43. He had no history of heart trouble. The medical examiner would say, in the kind way medical examiners say these things, that sometimes a man's heart simply gives out. He would say it could have happened anywhere. He would say it was a tragedy. Erin said, "Joe, he was driving home from your trip. What happened up there?" I said, "Erin, I don't know." I lied to her. I lied to her the way you lie to the widow of your best friend on the morning of the day she has lost him. I lied to her because the truth was a thing I could not say, and would not have been believed if I had said it. I lied to her because Mike had told me to lie. Mike had not told me to lie in words. Mike had told me to lie in the way he had said, "We need to leave, and don't look, and don't stop." Mike had built a wall around the thing in the meadow, and I was not the man to take down Mike's wall. I told Erin I would be at her house in 2 hours. I called Teresa. I told her Mike was dead. Teresa cried. I did not. We drove down to Cottonwood together. The funeral was 4 days later. Mike's 3 boys gave a eulogy together, taking turns. They were 16 and 14 and 11. The 16-year-old, Mike's oldest, did not cry while he was speaking, which made it harder to listen to. The 11-year-old did. I stood in the back of the church with Teresa, and I did not give a eulogy, because I had been asked to give one, and I had said I could not, and Erin had understood. After the service, there was a reception at the church hall. There was a ham, and there were green beans, and there were 3 different kinds of potato salad, because that is how church receptions work. I had not slept the night before the funeral. I had lain in bed, and I had run through the meadow in my head, over and over. I had run through it forward and backward. I had run through the voice. I had run through the 3 sentences. I had run through Mike's face when I had told him about it. I had tried the way a grown man tries when he is trying to convince himself of something, to find a way that the voice and Mike's heart attack were not connected. I could not find one. I had known they were connected from the moment Erin had called. The medical examiner had said the heart attack could have happened anywhere. The medical examiner had not been at the meadow. The medical examiner did not know what was at the meadow. The medical examiner had given Erin a kindness in the form of a story she could tell at the funeral, and Erin had taken the kindness, and the kindness was that Mike's heart had given out because hearts give out, and not because something had followed Mike, struck down the forest road and into a turnout on Highway 260 and parked next to him for an hour, the way I had been afraid to think. I was standing by the coffee urn when I saw the man. He was at the far end of the hall, by the window. He was wearing a dark suit. He was about Mike's height. He was about Mike's build. He had Mike's haircut. He had Mike's nose. He had the small scar over Mike's right eyebrow where Mike had fallen off a bike when he was 9 and put his head into a curb. He was Mike. He was almost Mike. He was the kind of Mike a man would be if he had been described to a sculptor very carefully, and the sculptor had then made the sculpture from photographs. He was looking at me. He smiled at me. The smile was Mike's smile. The flatness in it, there was a flatness in it, a flatness like the flatness in the O. I looked away. I looked at the coffee urn. I looked at the urn for what I think was about 5 seconds. I made myself look back. The man was gone. I scanned the hall. I scanned it twice. There were maybe 60 people in the hall, in small clusters, talking quietly, eating potato salad off paper plates. None of them were the man. None of them had Mike's face. The window where he had been standing was empty. The chair next to the window was empty. The folding table near the window had a stack of programs on it and a small floral arrangement, and that was all. I asked Erin afterward. I said, "Erin, who was the man at the back of the hall, by the window? Dark suit. About Mike's age." Erin said, "Joe. There were a lot of people there." "Was he family?" I said, "I don't know. I thought I should know him, and I didn't." Erin said, "Probably a teacher. Mike had a lot of teacher friends I never met." I said, "Probably. Yeah." I let it go. That was 2 months ago. I am doing fine. I want to say that. I am doing fine. My business is doing fine. Teresa and I are fine. The kids are fine. I have grieved Mike the way you grieve a best friend, which is to say, I have grieved him in pieces, one at a time, over breakfast and over coffee, and at 3 in the morning when I cannot sleep. And the pieces have not been finished, and I do not think they will ever be finished. But I will say this. The porch light at our house, the one above the front door, has come on by itself a few times in the last few weeks. It is on a switch, not a sensor. There is no reason for it to come on by itself. I had an electrician's eye on it the first time it happened, and I checked the wiring myself the second time, and the wiring is good. The third time it happened, I sat in the living room with Teresa, and I watched the porch through the front window for about an hour after the light came on. The porch was empty. The porch stayed empty. After about an hour, the light went off by itself. I went out and checked the bulb. The bulb was warm. The bulb was the bulb I had put in. I did not go any further than the porch. I went back inside. Last week, on a Tuesday, at about 9 in the evening, I was sitting in the living room with a beer and the television on, and Teresa was in the kitchen on the phone with her mother, and Bryn was upstairs doing her homework, and Mason was in the bath. The doorbell rang. I went to the door. Through the side window I could see a man standing on the porch. He was wearing a dark coat. He was about my height. He was about my build. He was facing the door. I did not open the door. I stood at the side window, and I looked at him. He looked back. He smiled. The smile was Mike's smile. He said through the door, "Joe, Joe, come on, it's me." The voice was Mike's voice. The O in Joe was flat. I did not say anything. I went into the kitchen. I told Teresa, very quietly, to hang up the phone. I told Teresa, very quietly, to take Brennan Mason and go into our bedroom and lock the door. I told Teresa I was going to handle it. I did not tell her what it was. Teresa, who was a smart woman and who had been married to me for 14 years and who knew when not to ask, did all of that. I went back to the front door. I did not open it. I said, through the door, "I know what you are. Get off my porch." The voice said, "Joe, it's me, brother. I came back." I said, "No, you didn't." The voice said, "Joe, come on. Open the door. I want to see you." I said, "I know what you are. I know what you are." I said it like a chant. I said it because I did not know what else to say. I said it because I needed to keep talking, the way you keep talking to a dog that might bite, the way you keep your voice even and your tone level, and you do not show the dog that you are afraid. The voice on the other side of the door said, "Joe, don't be like this. Just open the door. Just open it." I said, "No." The voice said, "Joe, I'm cold." I said, "No." There was a pause. There was a pause longer than a man would pause. The voice said, "Joe, you're going to open this door. Maybe not tonight, but you're going to." I said, "No." The voice said, "You're going to." The voice said it the way a man says something he's sure of. Not threatening, not angry, just sure. Like the voice was telling me a fact that we were both going to learn together over the next few months, and the voice was just letting me know now so I would not be surprised when it came true. I did not answer. After about a minute, I heard the steps go off the porch. I heard them go down the front walk. I heard them go past the mailbox. I heard them go a few yards down the street. Then I did not hear them anymore. I waited a long time before I went and got Teresa. I have not told Teresa what was on the porch. I have told Teresa that there was a man on the porch, and that the man scared me, and that I have called the police, and that I have called Aaron, and that we are looking into it. I have not called the police. I have not called Aaron. There is nothing the police can do. There is nothing Aaron can do. I have instead installed a second deadbolt on the front door, and a second deadbolt on the back door, and a window lock on every window on the first floor of the house. I have, this week, started leaving the porch light on all night. Teresa has not asked me what really happened. Teresa watched me install the deadbolts and the window locks, and she did not ask why. Teresa, who is a person I have lived with for 14 years, and who is smarter than I am, has watched me put new hardware on every entry to our house, and has not asked. She has, instead, started keeping a baseball bat by her side of the bed. She did this without telling me. I noticed it the second night the bat was there. The bat is a Louisville Slugger that I had bought for Mason last year for his Little League season. Mason had outgrown it. Teresa had moved it from the garage to our bedroom. She has not said anything about it. I have not said anything about it. We are not going to say anything about it. It has not been on the porch since. But the porch light still comes on by itself sometimes. I do not always know why. The other night, around 3 in the morning, I woke up because the light from the porch was coming through the front curtains in the living room, and I had not turned the light on. I lay in bed listening. The house was quiet. Teresa was asleep next to me. The kids were asleep upstairs. The dog, we have a small mutt named Rooster, was asleep at the foot of the bed. I lay there for a while and I listened. Out on the porch, very faint, very quiet, I heard a man laugh. It was a small laugh. It was the kind of laugh a man does when he is alone and amused. The laugh had no malice in it. It was, in some ways, the worst part. The laugh had no malice in it. The laugh was just a laugh. The laugh was the laugh of a man who knew something he was not going to share, who was on a porch at 3 in the morning enjoying himself. The laugh was Mike's laugh. I did not get up. I did not go to the window. I lay in the bed with Teresa breathing next to me and Rooster breathing at the foot of the bed, and I waited for the porch light to go off. After a while it did. I have not gone out on the porch at night since. I am going to sell the house in the spring. I have not told Teresa yet.